Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you took a little walk so that you could feel a little energized after the delicious lunch that we were treated to. My name is Reginald Clark, and I am one of the team members on the evaluation component of the Repairing the Breach initiative. And I will be the first up talking a little bit about what we did in the context of the initiative. And I'm happy to be here today with one of my colleagues, Walter Allen, who worked with us directly on our piece of the evaluation. And I'm also happy to be here with Ron Ferguson, who did some work regarding the evaluations in the initiative as well. So our role here, as I understand it, is to give you a little insight into what we did and what we discovered, in terms of what made a difference in terms of the Repairing the Breach initiative. I'm going to try to, I will be brief, I have to be brief, but there's a lot that we did, and so I'm just going to hit some key points because of the 10-minute limit that we have. I will tell you that we responded to, Walter and I responded to an RFP from the Repairing the Breach initiative asking for us to put together a proposal to do some work on a Kellogg Foundation-sponsored cluster evaluation. Cluster evaluation was a unique concept to some of us at the time because it's an evaluation model that says you're not here to find out what people are doing that's wrong. You're here to find out what people are doing that's right, and what they're doing that's wrong, you're here to show them that in such a way that they can improve upon it. And that's the whole Kellogg model. And about a year into the actual funding of most of the programs, we were brought into the picture, which has to do with a recommendation I'm going to make at the end of my remarks in terms of how evaluation should be tied in from the beginning. But in any event, we took up the mantle at that point, and we first did a baseline assessment of who was in the programs and how many people and all of the baseline data, demographic type data. Then we came back in a few months and did a pre-test where we actually tried to assess where people's heads were and where people's behavior patterns were. And the goal was to see if we could come back a year later and do a post-test and see what changes had been made in that time frame. And we did not do a randomized assessment or anything like that. Again, in these evaluation efforts, usually I would say, the evaluation kind of does not get the resources that it would need to do that level of analysis. But we worked with what we did and what we had, and we're able to do some nice multivariate analyses and come up with some hunches. I won't call them conclusions, but hunches about what was making a difference and why it was making a difference. One of the things that Bobby, Dr. Austin shared with us this morning is that they had this broad-based idea about what the goals were, and it involved making these human connections, the polis, the public works, civic stories. Dr. Austin's presentation this morning explained those concepts to us. Our job was then to take those concepts and see how we could demonstrate whether they were, some of that was actually going on as a result of these programs. There were 30 programs that we looked at. Most of them were in the eastern states and in the southern states. There were maybe a couple on the West Coast, but the West Coast was not equally represented in where these programs were located. What we were able to discover is that we could classify or cluster these programs into 3 villages based on the goals of the service delivery for the programs. And those villages we called the Entrepreneurial Leadership Village, which focused on developing entrepreneurial skills among the participants primarily, the personal and academic Leadership Village, which focused on personal and academic development of the participants, and the Family and Community Leadership Village, which focused on building up family and community among the participants in those programs. We were able to discover through our research that indeed there were some connections between what was going on in those programs and key indicators of what I'm going to call constructive lifestyle among the participants. In particular, one that I'm going to point out is that we did a time assessment. We actually clocked, or got them to clock actually, what they did for an entire week, a 168-hour week, and they actually completed a protocol that said what they did every half-hour increment for a week. And we did a pre-post test on that, and we were able to discover that those students or participants in these different villages in the programs, when they participated more in the programs, they tended to spend less time in unconstructive things like watching television and using drugs and alcohol, and they tended to more likely have higher grades and educational goals, volunteer activities more, and those kinds of things that would be considered as constructive. We also discovered another key point is that the student-staff ratio was critical to the growth that these youngsters experienced. Those programs that had more staff, and that could include the paid staff plus the volunteer staff, to work with the young people, the more staff they had in comparison to the number of students, the more likely it was that the students would say that they were spending their time constructively and that they had attitudes and goals toward education, higher levels of education. So staff size is critical in that it also affected, staff size affected the outreach that the directors were doing into the communities, and even the number of proposals that they were able to write to get more money. And so it was kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you were inundated with trying to help a lot of young people, you really didn't have time to do the kinds of things that it would take to maintain your program effectively. Plus, the people you were helping, you were only partially helping them because you were overloaded, basically. And that was I thought that was a useful discovery. And it says something, too, about funding of programs. One evaluation challenge that I'll comment on is that I think that in the future, the programs do need to start with the evaluation component at the very beginning, and it needs to be able to follow participants over a longer period than, say, 6 months or a year, as we did. In fact, it ideally should follow participants for at least a decade to see what kinds of long-term sustained impacts these programs are having. We also found that in terms of programming, too many of the programs were struggling to keep their doors open. And again, this goes back to resource issues which affect the fidelity and the sustainability of the programs. They were challenged to really do what I feel, and this is me talking, that is going to make the largest impact, and that is that in each one of these programs, I actually feel that they should have a component that not only does what the Eisenhower program was talking about in the previous panel, where you have the students going through some kind of mentoring and training and life skills development and et cetera. But every single one of these programs needs to have some component where at least for a couple of months or a summer, the kids get paid to actually do some work, get a job. In Chicago, for example, some of you may be familiar with the recent statistic that 90% of the black males don't have any work. 90% of young black males. And to be honest with you, there's no elixir to build self-esteem like having a few dollars in your pocket. I mean, that's just the bottom line on that. And so to me, that needs to be an integral part of every single one, even if it's a small piece. But that's not possible in most of these programs because of resource issues. I like the idea, for example, of teaching everyone how to start a small business as a possible way of getting to that. Another key point that I want to make is that after school and mentoring programs will only work to a point if the schools and the jobs are not there for them. The reality is that other work that I have done finds that the quality of the instruction in the school, the quality of the teaching staff have a huge impact on how students do on standardized tests. And so it's if that's working as well as the initiatives directed toward African American males, so much the better in terms of the likelihood that they're going to do well. Another key point that I want to make quickly is that we need to avoid narratives that pathologize black males. And it's a delicate balance, I think, in talking about the role of personal responsibility and versus the role of social structures. And you've heard people talk or refer to we need to focus on capacity, not deficit, and so on. And the reality is that by the time these young fellows have been through so much drama, there's probably a little bit of there's a lot of capacity, and there's probably a little bit of you know, feelings of defeat and some other not so positive emotions that they're dealing with and trying to wrestle with. But we, as program developers, I think, need to keep it clear in our minds that black male failure is not due to a lack of their fathers. In fact, you know, I'm for example, from a household where there was no father from the time of 5 years old. My mother was on welfare. We lived in the projects. And I know some of my colleagues on this panel and in this room were in the same situation. We have presidents who had no fathers. So to try to blame it on that, I think is a wrong approach. Now, that's not to say I don't think fathers matter. Certainly they matter. But to say that it's a necessary and sufficient condition for success is just false. My work 30 years ago in my book, Family Life and School Achievement, Why Poor Black Children Succeed or Fail, made that point poignantly, I think. The book is still in print, and University of Chicago Press published it because it did show case studies of people in these different family structures who were succeeding and some who were failing. So I was able to show just in that way that it goes deeper than that. And again, what I discovered is both there and as well as in our research here is that you have to look at what people do with their time. We all are endowed with 168 hours a week in our lives. It's what we do with those 168 hours that seems to be a much bigger determinant of success or failure. The other thing is to not fall into the myth of thinking that there's a lack of desire to work. This is something that we hear often. Oh, they just, you know, they're not working because they're too lazy. I need to do this hit this YouTube piece. Thank you. I want to show you something. This is from Chicago.
That fucking line go down 3 blocks right there.
And excuse the language. This is the tree.
This the 4th block. I'm dead damn serious. This the 4th fucking block. Like, they wouldn't believe us if we didn't film this shit. 3 blocks wrapped around 4th block. And this make 5. We crossed the alley. That's 5 motherfucking blocks. It's an emergency. That shit is ridiculous, man. Yeah. Somebody save me. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's 5, 6 fucking blocks. We turn here, there will be 6 blocks. It's an emergency. They're trying to sell gummy bears and shit. This is the 6th block. wrap back around.
Basically, what they do is they need to just take your application.
Somebody save me.
Because if they don't, this shit be all fucked.
Like I said, this is what they should have did when you registered. They should have took that ticket out and did like a raffle to call people in for interviews, like the best candidates. I think this is gonna be 7 o'clock though. You know, look at these motherfuckers. I told you they got chairs and shit. Damn, why you saying that? That's how you go now. No, don't you hear them people say they done?
Okay. Black people in Chicago. Looking for a job in 10-degree weather. So, you know, when people try to throw out that stereotype that they don't want to work, I said, okay, let's take a look at this. And this is that can be repeated. That's repeated all over the country whenever you find a situation where there's a lot of jobs, or like they'll say 50 jobs, and you get 500 people show up, that sort of thing. We are indeed continue to be in a depression. It goes beyond a recession. And the other thing is that we don't hear enough or see enough images like this one, which is, I believe, far more frequent in our communities, where we see young black people like these people. Somebody told me they think this is in a D.C. subway. I'm not sure. You see what's going on there. But you don't see that on TV. You don't see the other one even on TV, the one I just showed with you know, these people, regardless of their circumstances, they might not be the most literate or the most well-dressed, but they're out there in 10-degree weather looking for that job. And so I just want to suggest that any conceptualization of these programs needs to include those elements, and particularly, as I said, the work element as a part of the program planning. The Thurgood Marshall said, none of us got where we are solely by pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. We got here because somebody, a parent, a teacher, an Ivy League crony, or a few nuns, and in my case it was actually a few nuns, bent down and helped us pick up our boots. So thank you very much. And I will ask Walter to go next. Thank you. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Dr. Clark overviewed for you in considerable detail the work we did in the evaluation. As he communicated to you, we were very proud and honored to do that work, and felt frustrated at points that we couldn't do more with it. I have a few minutes, and I don't want to overrun the time that I have here. So if I can just kind of build around Dr. Clark's assessment and his details. The first thing I would do is to tell you that a publication or two can be found which gives you a lot of the details and all the richness of what we undertook in this evaluation. Promising Practices is the title of that publication. It is in a book from Oxford University Press, published in 2010, titled Social Work Among African American Males. So that book will give you a lot of the detail that we of necessity have to skip over here today. I just wanted to make a few general remarks that are broader and background oriented, and I'll just do a little bit of reading through them just so that I can expedite. The RTB initiative was an historic recognition of and recommitment to the American dream. 20 years ago, under leadership from Dr. Austin, the Kellogg Foundation, and a cast of luminary collaborators, including Ambassador Young, RTB took to heart Marion Wright Edelman's adage, "It takes a village to raise a child." In this sense, RTB was a commitment from the larger community surrounding black men and boys to recognize and address the debilitating, demoralizing, destructive forces too many black men and boys confronted in their lives. RTB was a hopeful response, a pushback, if you will, against the despair, resignation, and in some quarters, embarrassment associated with the perpetually depressed status of black men in America. Black males, men, and boys were overrepresented and continue to be so today, as we know, among this country's poor, undereducated, uneducated, incarcerated, sick, addicted, and just generally downtrodden. Black men and boys gave the lie to the lofty notions and promises of the American dream, or so it seemed. Among the greatest contributions of RTB in this sense was to present America with a more holistic view of black males, if you will. RTB reinforced the view that black men and boys were, first and foremost, part of this society, part of the polis. They were and continued to be integral members of the community and central and key members of our village, if you will. RTB shone a broad spotlight which revealed not only failures, but also successes among black males in America. Through RTB, we were re-engaged in and forced to confront a kind of national conversation with the primary focus being on issues that are at the center of this country's ideals: community, fair play, and the necessity to develop in all people the capacity to make their contributions to the common good. So 20 years later, we gather to recall, revisit, and perhaps even, or certainly as well, to honor RTB. Now, unfortunately, too many black men and boys are still stuck at the bottom of American life. So, no, RTB didn't solve all the problems. Problems that grew out of 500 years of a combination of slavery, Jim Crow, caste segregation, and continuing racial and economic discrimination don't simply go away overnight. However, what RTB did accomplish and what it did help to do was to renew our hope. I remember at that time that when we were thinking about the evaluation and the program and our visits with various sites and participants in those programs as well as staffs, we always came away feeling very hopeful and feeling lifted and having been reminded of just the power of the human spirit, often in the face of the worst circumstances, to rise to greater heights. So in this sense, the success stories that came out of RTB and out of that mixed methods evaluation that we completed served to just, as I said, reframe the conversation and to showcase programs and to just reject this notion that what we were seeing was inevitable in terms of the disproportionate failures of black men and boys. Because with that concrete evidence of success, we demonstrated and lived in those programs and in the actions and activities of the individuals participating in the programs, the fact that it was not absolutely necessary that we were seeing the kinds of outcomes that we were seeing. And that just as those outcomes had been manufactured and created, that with proper interventions, they could be reversed. And one of the lessons that came through very clearly to us was that those successful programs were built on human-to-human connections between adult mentors and those young men, connections between peers who were positively oriented and some older black men who had been incarcerated and were trying to avoid the pitfalls of recidivism. So those human connections, that human investment made a difference. Those supportive environments and contexts, that's kind of scaffolding that those of us who sit in this room benefited from, but that for many of these people who were, these young men and boys who were in this program, such opportunity was being denied. We were just able to use the evidence to point out that in many respects it's not rocket science. And some of that good stuff that translates into the successes that we see among the respectable people will have the same beneficial effects when they're extended to other individuals who've been denied those kinds of opportunities. As I try to zip through and do a quick wrap up, I will share with you my kind of key finding coming out of our evaluation. Dr. Clark has already pointed out that resources were always a challenge for these programs. The programs were just under-resourced. There was so much need and so little time and other resources to apply toward those needs. And it often translated in those programs, into those programs doing really great, incredible work, but not having the resources to document the work. And running into the contradiction of a set of pressures that said, do all of this good work and do it with as many people as you can reach and keep expanding and expanding and expanding your base, but at the same time being in a situation where you couldn't even keep accurate records, and certainly you couldn't keep systematic research records. And so that was part of our challenge too in terms of how we conducted this, this evaluation. Fortunately, the frame that we were presented with allowed for the recognition that in this instance, the straight, strict, randomized, double-blind clinical evaluation design was not going to work. We didn't have the money, and the clientele and the programs we were working with didn't have the resources to set it up. So, but what we could do is take our lessons from those multiple data points, our pre and post studies with the participants, our observational data, our data from life histories, our data from the documents and the records and the information we could get from public sources. All of that came into play and allowed us to move to a place where we could sketch and provide the kind of evaluation that those of us who do research, you come to understand that with that empirical work, it's science and it's art. You go through and you do the scientific pieces and you do the rigorous adherence to the model, but then there are points at which research goes the direction that research goes. And that's when one has to be nimble and resilient, and that's where the piece of art comes in. Or put another way, you get the data, but the data doesn't speak for itself. So you then have to become the spirit medium, interpreting the data and talking about what's going on there. And so we were able to do this. We were motivated to do it, and are just struck by the fact that the work continues to call out to you young folks who are here today to pick this up and carry it forward. And for whatever it's worth, know that we have gobs of data. We have data sets of interviews and surveys, and we are more than happy to turn it over to one of you enterprising young scholars who is willing and ready to pick it up and carry it forward. So again, I will stop there and just end by thanking the organizers of this conference and reiterating the spirit of hopefulness that has come forth in so many of the presentations. Thank you very much. Okay, buddy, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Ron Ferguson. And I'm actually going to look forward as opposed to backward at the evaluation. And I want to suggest to you that we are already in the early phases of a 21st century movement. Nobody has naming privileges. I like to call it the movement for excellence with equity. You can call it whatever you want to, but there are people all over the country who are stepping up, who know that we're defining our national identity for the next 100 years or so, and are trying to find ways to contribute. And there are a few things, a few facts that you probably don't know, and that people who know them usually don't say in public, but I want to tell you and talk about a couple of the implications. of these and try to get through it quickly. The first fact is that the racial and socioeconomic skill gaps are evident by the age of 2. It's not something that starts at school. It's something that starts from the very earliest moments of life, right? And if that's true, it means we need to reach out from the earliest moments of life and reach people with ideas and supports for what they can do differently at home. Okay, it's not the programs, it's kids' lived experiences. And more generally, the entire movement should be about affecting young people's lived experiences at home, at school, with their peer group, on their job, all these different places. And people who interact with them need to know what it looks like. Okay, so a lot of what we need to do is to show people what does it look like to do things interacting with young people that will serve their long-term best interest. Now, just to show you, this is Early Childhood Longitudinal Survey, nationally representative data. The 1.0 line at the top is the level of the 1-year-olds whose parents have some graduate education. Notice that this is at the age 1-year-old, and independent of the parents' education level, they're all up there near that 1.0 line. Okay, not much difference at 1 year old. Then we go to by race, and so you have white, Asian, black, Hispanic. Similarly, not much difference at age 1 year old. By age 2, it looks like that. That's by parents' education. This is by race. There's a new study out of Stanford that shows that by age 2, kids from less advantaged backgrounds are 6 months behind in language processing skills. So you've got to start from the beginning, early. By age 4, by parents' education, you'll see that kids whose parents did not finish high school are less than half as likely to even know their colors by age 4. But you can look at all these things, and you see the disparities are there. So the gap is not produced at school. It's there when kids start school. It's there when they're 2 years old. All right? This is by race at age 4. Notice that in math and in fine motor skills, Asian kids are already ahead by age 4. So the Asian stereotype in math, it's there before kindergarten. It's early life experience. Okay, the evidence is accumulating that there are racial and social class differences in early childhood life experience. No reason to think it's genetics, that it's biology. But we need to distill what those early experiences are and make sure that parents know how to provide them and get support to provide them. Right? So we have a project out of the Achievement Gap Initiative here, which I had, which the web address is agi.harvard.edu. There are more than 200 videos on the site of research-based presentations related to achievement issues. Anyway, the notion with seeding success together is to take 5 basics of early childhood caregiving and saturate communities with them. So if you're in these neighborhoods, there's no way you don't know it, because every place you can touch a parent, at the laundromat, the grocery store, the doctor's offices, the radio station, you're hearing about this stuff. Grandmothers are asking mothers, you doing that stuff with your baby? Okay. Big brothers and sisters are coming home from school. Mommy, I saw some stuff that said we ought to be doing this. Okay, so there's no way you don't hear it. And these are the basic 5. Always share love, not stress. Okay, babies can pick up the stress that their parents are bringing home. Care circles, people can work with mothers, say, here, you go take a hot bath for an hour, I'll watch the baby. Okay, just helping people to manage their stress. Talk and point early and often, and real talk, not baby talk. Babies are encoding language from the earliest moments. And pointing at what you're talking about can accelerate their comprehension. Okay, so real talk, not baby talk, from the very beginning, and pointing. Use math and teach math words. Big, long, far, high, long, what the word, low, long. And so just those magnitude words start to develop number sense. Right? Not just counting toes, but counting toes is good, but doing these other things in addition. And then helping toddlers explore objects in spaces. The fine motor skills difference that we saw for the Asians over there, math skills, fine motor appear to be linked in the brain. The evidence is just accumulating. But did I turn that off myself? The evidence is just accumulating, but the idea is that the exploring objects deals with that eye-hand coordination, the integration, and appears to be related to math skills. And so helping kids, imagine a kid crawling around envisioning what's on the other side of the couch in his mind's eye, building a mental map. That's the kind of stuff we want to have kids do. And then fifth, discuss while you read with toddlers. Ask them to remember, explain, anticipate. So you have that nice interaction as you go in there. So the idea is we're going to saturate communities with this. We're trying to launch in 2 neighborhoods this coming summer. And then we'll have a kit that you can use in any neighborhood across the country that you want to, and methods to do this. The other 2 facts, I'll just tell you right quick, because actually there's one chart I want to show you at the end of this. But the second fact is that the achievement gap is largest among the children of the most educated. Okay? For each group, the line is positively sloping. The more education the parents have, the higher the kids' test scores are. But the line is steeper for whites than it is for blacks and Hispanics. So the further you go out, the bigger is that vertical distance between the line for blacks and the lines for whites. Okay, I don't tell most audiences this, okay, but I'm telling you because we need to know that this is not just about poor people. This is about our kids in this room, okay? And so the things that we need to know, things we need to do, supports we need to provide, things we need to share in order to get that done. Finally, only about a third of all kids finish 4-year college degrees. For blacks, Latinos, it's more like 20 or even below 20%. Sometimes the 42% figure you saw earlier is that 42% of all kids who finish BAs are boys across all racial groups. Okay, but if only about a third kids are going to get BAs, that means 2/3 are not. What do we put in place for them? The College for All movement is a laudable movement. We need to get everybody into the college and 4-year college degree paths for whom it fits. But it doesn't fit for everybody. And we have underdeveloped a system for everybody else. Okay? And so the idea is that if you imagine 3 kids, A, B, and C, the red, green, and the blue, there are a lot of kids like B who look around and say, everybody's better than I am at everything. Okay, I'm just behind everybody. But imagine there's a point out there where that star is, that something needs to get done in the world. Who's in the lead to get it done? B. Okay, that's B's destiny. That's B's North Star. And so we need to help kids understand that your life's work is to discover your North Star and to pursue it. You won't know where it is till you get there. You'll be an old person before you really know. But when you get there, you will find out that it was unique to you and you had no competition. You never had any competition. Okay? You just got to do what you can do, move it in the direction that fits the purpose that you feel at a moment in time. And when you get there, you can be successful just along with everybody else. Okay? I'm suggesting we need a North Star project. Okay? Where we pull together all the different ideas that are relevant to helping kids overcome the barriers to becoming their best selves. And you can lump a lot of stuff together under that heading. Okay, so I invite you to, let's do the North Star Project, and let's do Seeding Success together. Okay, I'll stop. I think we're done.
So do we have time for a question or two? Yes? Okay. We have time for a question or two. Yes, ma'am.
Low-income minority students getting into selective 4-year colleges,
Right.
which is not just the Harvard or the Yales, it's colleges that have less than a 50% selection admission.
Right.
Have you taken the North Star further out? Because if you look at the statistics, it's 5% of African American and Latinos versus the 15% that are in the selective group. How does your research sort of compare, not just against all normative colleges, but against the 4-year schools? Because there's research that says you're earning more income. You know, there's a whole status conscious. So I just want to hear a little bit more about that dialogue.
Yeah, this North Star notion is for all kinds of kids. The kids for whom they're going to get a doctorate, the kids who are going to drive a truck. Okay, they just have different destinies, and they need to search for those. Okay, you do tend to earn more money if you go to a more selective school. But the kids who go to more selective schools already were a bit ahead in their skills and might have earned more money even if they hadn't gone to a more selective school, right? So I don't have anything particularly profound to say in response to your question, except that we just need to help every child find whatever fits best for them and pursue it. And also, for the kids who want to go to the most elite schools, some of them don't know about financial aid. Okay, we need to let them know that the money is probably going to be there if you just get prepared.
Right, and that's part of the mismatch theory, right?
Yeah.
Any other question? Yes, sir? Oh, yes.
My name is Thomas Houston, and my question is actually on Dr. Ferguson's chart, but anybody can answer it. We've all seen the videos of the 2 or 4-year-olds laughing and learning all the words to the songs. And when you look at the chart, you see motor skills by Asians. They learn a lot faster by age of 4. But I believe African Americans, in terms of expressive vocabulary, we're either leading or number 2. So
that was on the chart
teach
too.
Differently. Huh?
So that was on the chart too.
Yeah, so that's what I'm referring to.
Okay.
So not saying that we should teach differently, but should we look at different ways to teach to make sure that we're catching up to how we learn by the age of 4?
Yeah. I'd like to just comment briefly on that because I was fascinated by the chart as well. And it reminded me of a program that I have actually co-developed for parents of preschoolers. And what we discovered is we would take 8 hours and teach parents 24 games they could play that would cultivate those kinds of skills that in the child that would enable them to go into kindergarten able to know their numbers, their colors, and those conceptual notions that are expected of kindergartners. And just one observation on that. First of all, when parents got that knowledge, they pretty quickly got those kids up to the point where they could be prepared for kindergarten. And I've known of at least one other program in Bakersfield, California, where teachers were able to take parents for a week before school start and work with the parents and the children and get those kids up to speed in a relatively short amount of time, at least with regard to being prepared for kindergarten. So that's encouraging to me because while the charts seem to me, could suggest to some people that you got this embedded deficit that starts early and now they're never going to have a chance. What we discovered is they are so pliable at that young age till it doesn't really take much of an intervention to get them up to speed at that level anyway.
Right. Now, I put the chart up there because we can do something about it.
Right.
Okay. If I thought we were stuck in the mud and there's nothing we could do, I wouldn't even showed it to you. Okay. Now, it is tricky. People sometimes get real mad at you for showing this kind of stuff in public. Okay. But we got to talk about it if we can do anything about it.
Yeah, and just a quick word, I'm encouraged as well. I think it's good for us to have the benchmark, but as Reginald points out, when the schools cooperate with the children in positive ways, you get the positive responses. So the kids operate within a larger environment, and as Bobby's story this morning reminded us, you know, his son didn't have those kinds of deficits when he went to that school, but they looked at his face and imprinted those deficits on him, and the school system functioned in such a way as to undercut that kid. So I know you're aware of the fact that all the connections are there, and it's just very good for us to be reminded and to have this actual concrete example of when you change and vary the interventions, you get immediate positive responses. So if the teachers teach a little differently, if the school looks at those kids differently, you get a more positive response.
Please let's thank our panel.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to say 2 things about the panel. Dr. Ferguson was really our first scholar on the African American Men and Boys Initiative. I can't think of the name of his paper, neither can he, I bet you. What a Piece of Work Is Man was the book. That was the book, and it had to do with the kind of teachers that certain kids get when they are, you know, he did a study, and it was eye-opening for us and was eye-opening for how we wanted to approach this. And of course, these evaluators were unbelievable. We did, they had lots of constraints from us, as sometimes will happen, but they did a fantastic job. Thank you very much. Well, we're coming to the big finale here. Oh, thank you. We're going to ask the, we're going to ask the people with access to money and power to please to come forward so we can have our final discussion. And they are Sean Dove, who is the moderator for this group, Leah Austin, who is at the Annie E. Casey Foundation, William Buster from the Kellogg Foundation, David Johns from the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans, Brian Marks from the Morehouse Research Institute, Rashid Shabazz from the Open Society Foundation, and Travian Shorters from Be Me Community. And they're going to talk about what is on the horizon, the state of the field, and what is the influence, what was, I guess, what is the influence of RTB? Thank you, gentlemen and lady.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Sean Dove, and I'm the campaign manager for the Open Society Foundation's campaign for Black Male Achievement. And we launched the campaign for Black Male Achievement 6 years ago to improve the life outcomes of black men and boys in America. And when I took this assignment, I knew that this was not the first iteration or focus on black men and boys in America. And one of the first things that I did was to find Dr. Austin in D.C. and have a lunch date with him, and knew that this was a daunting mission. This was a 3-year campaign. My foundation thought we were going to solve this issue in 3 years, and so I said I needed to find some people to talk to, and it was just really inspiring. Just, I had heard about the Village Foundation, and, you were just so gracious to share your lessons learned, the ropes to jump, the ropes to skip, and with all of that, I just want to thank you. This has been a retrospective day, right? And this is a kind of a kairos moment in this my brother's keepers moment. Who would have thought 20 years from the launch of the African American Men and Boys Initiative by Kellogg, 20 years later we would have a black male president in his second term, right? 20 years ago there was no internet, or I wasn't on it, right? And there was no Twitter, no Facebook. I had a cell phone that was 5 pounds on my hip, and so we've come a long way. But as we have all heard today, also that activity doesn't always equal progress, right? And there's been a lot of activity, and there are certainly some things to lift up. But when we look at the data that is in repairing the breach, 20 years later, homicide is still the #1 leading cause of death for black males 15 to 24. But on the other hand, we have more black males graduating college annually. And so just really thank you for this opportunity to have this day. Nothing happens without leadership. I want to lift up the organizers of this, Dorian Burton, Ariana Austin, and on the panel, Professor Marks. And so what we want to do is, this is the future panel, and we have some black futurists on the panel. If they did not know they were futurists, they know it now. Just a few things I want to say before we turn it over, and we want to leave time to have a conversation and a dialogue with the folks here. And sometimes we feel like we're preaching to the choir in sessions like this, but choir needs hope, right? The choir needs support, and the choir needs mission fuel to continue this work. And I think it's real important to say, and when we look at the principles of repairing the breach, the whole notion of building community is really important. And while the narrow lens is really black men and boys, African American men and boys, narrow lens point of departure, the wide angle lens is about our community, which is really inclusive of women, girls, everyone in our community. And I just want to lift up Susan Taylor. We gave her an acknowledgement before, but I want to ask her to stand up again, because I like to call her a national treasure only because she is, and she founded National Care's mentoring movement, and just simply, unequivocally, unapologetically loves black people and our children, and can be on cruise control, but is all over the country leading this work. And I can go on, but also Ron Mincy could not go any further without asking Ron Mincy to stand up, because Ron Mincy, he is on the Mount Rushmore of the responsible fatherhood movement, but he has also been in government, philanthropy, and Ron has also been one of the folks that I talked to early on in leading this work. And, so it's really been about where do we go from here. Just 3 more things, and we're going to get started. Before I say anything else, just want to let folks know that the cavalry is not coming. There is no Lone Ranger coming into our communities to save the day. The iconic leaders that we are waiting for, look around you. They're right here. I want to ask the brothers from Bard to stand up, from Bard College, that are here. Let's give these brothers a round of applause. These brothers on their own dime got here from Bard College. One young man is from the Expanded Success Initiative in New York City, and met him a year ago at a speech. And during this speech, he declared that when he got to Bard, he was going to start a young men's initiative at Bard, right? And sometimes we say a lot of things, we act like we're futurists, right? And, we're going to do something and we declare something, and sometimes we don't get around to it. This young man got to the campus as a freshman and started what he declared he was going to do. And so the future is now, and anyone under 33 years old, can you please stand? Please stand. Anyone under 33 years old, please stand. So thank you very much. Wow. So the future is right here in this room. All right, so I have more, but I'm going to shut up. I have a list of things that I was going to say, but tomorrow is Resurrection Sunday, right? And I really appreciate the opportunity to prepare for this conference and dive into repairing the breach. And all the principles are right on point, right? And they're not new principles for our community, right? There are age-old, generational, back to Africa principles. So they're not new principles, but they're now principles. And hopefully what happens after today, can we resurrect that, right? These principles, can we align them with my brother's keeper, which we're going to hear about from one of our panelists. And so we have some dynamic people in front of you. I already used up the time to read their bios, so I'm not going to do that. We are going to give each of them 8 to 8.5 minutes to do their presentation. And they had some guiding questions that we gave them, what's on the horizon in the field for BMA. But I think the real manifestation of this moment is what's the story we're going to be able to tell in 2034? Will we have really maximized this moment? Will we have translated this activity and this energy, these pledges, into true change? And so we've asked them in their futurist to bring their futurist caps. And so we're going to go in order that we have in the program. And Leah Austin is going to lift up, how the fruit don't fall too far from the tree. And Leah is the Deputy Director of the Two Generation Strategy at the Anna E. Casey Foundation. So we're going to ask Leah to come on up first.
So so no pressure. I don't fall too far from the tree, and I'm also the only woman on the panel. So,
And a new mom.
and a new mom. And a new mom. I think people are now discovering that I don't have the baby always attached to me, because a couple of people have said, oh, okay, you do exist without the baby. So anyway, let me get started, given that I've taken half of my 8.5 minutes. So let me start. What I wanted to do was just give a little bit of details, a little information on the Annie E. Casey Foundation and the work that we're doing. So the mission of the foundation is really to help all children achieve their full potential in life, regardless of race or ethnicity. But as we've explored today, when we take an honest look at our communities, it becomes obvious that boys of color have a tough time, right? At every stage, whether it's early childhood through adulthood, there seem to be some challenges that we want to find some solutions to. So our efforts really to strengthen families, to create paths to opportunity, and to build more supportive communities are designed to improve the lives of all children, but have particular benefits for young men of color who are disproportionately impacted by systems that, quite frankly, don't work for them. We know that these challenges that these young men face can't be solved by any single organization. We don't have that desire to be that single organization. And so we're excited about opportunities like this, where we get to deepen partnerships with the public, with private sectors, and others in the philanthropic community to really take collective action and to learn from one another. Before I talk about some of our existing efforts, I want to just mention that this spring we put out a report called Race for Results. And Race for Results is what it does is provide state-level index. So there's a physical report that you can access, and then there's also a website that you can go to. And what this really does is it disaggregates data into racial and ethnic lines and allows you to really see where we are in our nation, and then provide some recommendations for work that we can all do together. So if you wanted to access that, you can go to the Casey Foundation site and then find the Race for Results. It's actually / Race for Results. So let me talk a little bit about our existing grant making. And I want to talk about it in kind of 3 categories. So we have work around strengthening families, which really focuses on juvenile justice and child welfare. And so many of you may know, have heard of the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, which is something that Casey funds and is in about 250 communities in 39 states, including Washington, D.C. The idea here is to really look at what are the alternatives to locking young men up, right? So what do we do that can avoid that but also support and help people? So one of the examples is in Cook County, Illinois, in Chicago. There's a program that is, instead of full-time detention, is actually putting into place after school, if you will, or community referral centers, so that young people can work during the day or go to school during the day, and then in the evenings is where they actually report for what would be their detention time. The other area I want to talk about is our child welfare area. So we know that African American children are vastly overrepresented in the foster care population. And once in foster care, African American children tend to stay longer than all other children. Therefore, these children face a significantly greater risk of growing up without a strong permanent family. So we provide strategic consulting tools and resources to public agencies and foster care providers to really help them make better decisions and to better support families so that fewer children enter the system, and to ensure that those who do get connected to lifelong families are connected with these families as quickly as possible and stay with these families. Some of the states that we're doing this work in are New York, Louisiana, Maine, and Virginia. Another category that we are investing in or thinking a lot about is both educational and economic opportunity. So some of you may have heard of our campaign for grade level reading, which is a national campaign. And it's a campaign that's really bringing attention to the need for children to read at grade level by 4th grade. So we know, and Dr. Ferguson talked a lot about early childhood education, which I was really excited to hear about. We know that 3rd grade is a key indicator. So what this campaign is really saying is, what do we need to do across states, across cities, to support kids so that when they leave third grade, they are in fact reading at grade level. This initiative is happening in 142 communities across the country. We're also looking at, again, kind of child welfare, but specifically around foster care. We have the Jim Casey Youth Opportunities Initiative. This Opportunities Initiative is really geared towards helping young people between the ages of 14 and 25 to make successful transitions from foster care to adulthood. A highly programmatic element of Jim Casey is to encourage youth who are aging out of foster care to use what's called the Opportunity Passport. This Opportunity Passport is an innovative matched savings program for youth that can help them build assets and then use these funds to further their education. Lastly, communities. So we're working in a number of communities. I mean, our work is national, but we have two what are called civic sites, the Atlanta Civic Site, which is where I'm housed, and then also our Baltimore Civic Site. The civic sites are where we do a lot of our place-based funding. The idea here is that, and we've talked about this a lot today, is that people don't grow up kind of individually and independently by themselves, but they grow up, they live, they work, they play, hopefully they thrive within communities. And so the work here is really to support communities in developing as safe and healthy places to live, work, and play. Atlanta, where I am, I'm actually leading our work there. And I really want to lift this piece up because I think, you know, getting to this question of how repairing the breach has influenced and is influencing our work and influencing the field. I see it in a lot of our work, but I really see it in our community work and really see it when we look at the civic sites. Because the work here is really not about working on these communities, but really working with these communities. So this is where we see the community-driven solutions. And I want to just give you one example. The Atlanta Civic Site is working in, there's a set of 5 neighborhoods in Atlanta where we work. This is a set of neighborhoods that's 98% black, has double the rate of unemployment than the city of Atlanta. There's a workforce development nonprofit in this set of neighborhoods called the Center for Working Families. They do fantastic work. We fund the Center for Working Families, and actually a couple years ago, about 4 years ago, conducted like a focus group to talk to participants, talk to parents who were at the center to find out how are things going, you know, how can we help, how can we support. And parents overwhelmingly said, you know, the Center for Working Families is great, the opportunities are wonderful, but I still have a big challenge to being able to gain any sort of employment. And of course we were like, well, what's that challenge? And folks said, there's no high quality early childhood education in this set of communities. There are places where I can drop my child off, and if I have to do that, I do that. But what I really want is a place where I know my child is not only going to be loved and cared for, but my child's going to be educated. And so the Casey Foundation worked with the community to literally take that concern and build an early childhood center. And there's some folks in this room who have actually visited the center. David Johns came a couple months ago and visited it's an Educare site, visited the center, which we are extremely proud of. And I lift that up because it's just an example of how we don't have to come in and tell the community what they need or what we think they need, but the community can really say to us, here's what we need, we know why we need it, and can you support us? And so it's just a lovely example of how that's happened. I also just want to mention, as we're talking of, or as I'm talking about early learning, we are beginning to see some tremendous results from this early learning center and have started to disaggregate the data so that we'll be able to really look and see, well, how are our young African American boys at the center doing, and are going to be able to put out some sort of report or document within the next year to really display that, and so excited about that work. In addition to that, I want to just sort of draw this picture as we've talked this entire day, and we've talked about like economic development and neighborhood transformation. This work that I've just mentioned is then nested within grassroots leadership development. And so work that we're doing is with a number of the parents in the community, residents in the community, And then there are what we call neighborhood planning units, which are essentially kind of your civic associations. And so Casey is doing a lot of work supporting these civic associations as they have decided that they want to really develop their leadership so that they can support more of their own solutions in their communities. The last thing that I'll mention in terms of the community work is that we are also kind of taking all of this and situating it in a physical development strategy where we're really looking to support this community in improving both access and quality to housing, as well as what we're calling sort of work and play opportunities. So this is a community that's known as like a food desert. So there's not one grocery store actually in the entire set of 5 neighborhoods. And so we're working with the community to figure out how we can actually physically put a grocery store in this set of neighborhoods. We're referring to this work as our 2-generation strategy. And as I mentioned, this is the work that I'm really leading for the foundation. And the reason it's called the 2-generation strategy is because it supports both parents and children simultaneously. And that's the way Casey really sees itself being able to support and bring solutions to the forefront, is to really talk about how do we support families as a whole. That's what we mean by 2-generation. Casey is deeply interested in this strategy and really wants to learn more and understand what all the possible solutions are. So in large part, that's why we wanted to support this conference or support this convening, because we saw this as an opportunity to really spend one full day learning, and I've been taking lots of notes when I've been kind of in and out of the room, so that we can then take the lessons from repairing the breach back and use them and apply them to the work that we're doing nationally, and then specifically in some of those place-based opportunities that I've mentioned to you. So I'll stop there. I think that may have been 9 minutes versus 8.5.
Thank you, Leah. And brothers, I just want to let you know that Leah gets a pass because she's the only sister on the panel. She's Bobby Austin's daughter, and plus she funded this today. And so there are no more passes with time. And we are going to go as we see this list. So I don't even have to get up again. William Buster, David Johns, Brian Marks, Rashid Shabazz, and Trabian Shorters. And we're going to ask Brother Buster, William Buster, with the Kellogg Foundation, and that's great, the initial funder of Repairing the Breach, and any Casey Foundation partnering to come together to bring us this. And William is the director of Kellogg's Mississippi and New Orleans initiatives. William Buster.
Good afternoon. I know some of you, but many of you I do not know. So the one thing that I will warn you about is that I like to tell the truth. And since Sean tells me I don't get with Kellogg, I don't get an OG excuse to kind of use a little bit of time since we were at the beginning. But I will try to be as honest as I can with you about the work. I think that just first, a little bit about the Kellogg Foundation. I'll share with you that we really believe in the work that we're doing around young males of color, particularly African-American males. The mission of the Kellogg Foundation is to support children and families and communities as they strengthen and create the conditions that propel vulnerable children to achieve success as individuals and as contributors to the larger community. That is actually driven by some core values of the foundation. We believe in helping people help themselves. We believe all people have the inherent capacity to affect change in their lives. We believe that stewardship requires fidelity to the spirit and to the intent of our founder, Will Keith Kellogg. And we believe that innovation of thought and action leads to enduring positive change. Now, that is what gives us the space to do the work that we're doing. We have to be responsive to the needs of the children that we're facing. As many of you know, as of 3 years ago, most of the children under the age of 5 in this country are children of color. And for us, as the Kellogg Foundation, particularly the work that we're doing in our places, that is the truth. In places like Mississippi, in Louisiana, in New Mexico, we're talking about brown and black children who are the ones that are being left behind. In places like Detroit, our home, in Michigan, we're talking about those very children who are being left behind. I'm here as a representative of the Kellogg Foundation, and particularly our new CEO, LaJune Montgomery Tabron. I don't know if any of you know her, but she is a dynamic person who's been at the Kellogg Foundation for 27 years, I think. And she speaks, when she talks about this work around repairing the breach, she talks about it from the perspective of being there when it was taking place. She says that this is in our DNA. It's part of what we have to do. She wants us to understand that we are recommitting ourselves to the work of supporting young black males in the communities in which we work. How does the work live? Currently, the work lives in place. So, talked about the inherent right of people to chart their own course. About 4 years ago, our board decided that if you were going to affect change, you had to understand whether or not the change was being effective. And we decided to go deeper in some communities. Our home state of Michigan, particularly in Detroit, in Battle Creek, our home base, in Grand Rapids, as well as some other places. New Mexico, where we had long relationships, and in New Orleans, because we had been there post-Katrina, and we believed that there was a lot of work to be done there, and then Mississippi, where we had a lot of long-term relationships. One of the things that I always talk about, and I tell our teams always, is that children don't live in programs. They don't even live in schools. They live in these families. They live in the communities where these families live. And to the point that was made earlier, we believed that if you're going to affect change, you have to first understand that all of these things are interconnected. We take the approach of supporting work that links pieces together. So if you're going to go into a community and support work around improving schools, but not pay attention to the fact that the parents of those children don't have access to good jobs, then you're not really helping the community. You're kind of, it's like when you put, and you tell your child, because my child does this, you put the peas on the plate, and then you just spread the peas out and think that you're making it seem like you've done something about it, but it's still the same thing on the plate. We believe that if you do not begin to make the linkages, this is what philanthropy can do, of saying that if we're going to support education improvement, then you have to support access to economic opportunity. You have to support parents' understanding of how they can better engage the school system, how they engage and speak for themselves when it comes to physical infrastructure. I live in a place now, I moved to Jackson from Battle Creek to lead all of our work in the region, and one of the things that I began to see was the inability of folks to understand that while we're trying to improve education in a place like Mississippi, if you don't pay attention to the legacy of race, and I'll get to that in a second, then you really are not trying to change what's happening on behalf of children. This approach is necessary. And one of the other core bodies of work that the Kellogg Foundation believes in is this notion of the legacy of race and racism in this country. Philanthropy has the luxury, where others may not, of addressing those hard pieces, those hard conversations as it relates to racism. And now, I'm not just talking about improving educational outcomes for kids and improving access to economic opportunity. All of those things are very important. I will talk a little bit more specifically about some of the work that we've done. And Sean, you have to tell me how much time. I was supposed to start my timer, Sean, and I did not. Oh, I got a minute and 10 seconds left. But we believe that philanthropy's ability to kind of foster this conversation in a safe space. We call it racial healing at the Kellogg Foundation. We don't talk about anything at the Kellogg Foundation. We don't talk about healthy kids, which is core to our work, educated kids, which is core to our work, secure families, which is core to our work, without saying, oh, but this country has a legacy around race that if you don't address, particularly for the kids that we care about, then you will not solve the problem. Now, real quickly, some of the work that we're doing in places like Mississippi and Louisiana. In Louisiana, one of the things that we're proud of is the way in which the community is beginning to understand that you have to put children at the center. We just had a meeting of all of our grantees last week, and that was the core conversation, that if we're going to improve access to economic opportunity, how does that look in a child-centered city? So for us, and this is where young males of color, black males particularly, come in, is that you begin to understand, that's my timer, but I'll just take one more second. You'll begin to understand that if you fix these systems, if you give them access and pipelines, so we're working with the local community college to say that you need to understand that these young men are the ones in which you need to pull into your schools to get them prepared for the economic opportunities that are coming around technology in New Orleans, around healthcare. They will be the drivers. We've mapped it out. We've come up with about 1,500 young men that could actually get jobs now, good paying jobs in New Orleans, if the systems worked together, from the community college to all the on the ground groups that are working with these young men, to the young men and their families themselves, getting them ready to be a part of the economic opportunity while you're addressing the unique history of racism in New Orleans. We've already partnered with the city on their Welcome Table initiative, where it is their hope that by the 300th anniversary of New Orleans, which is in 2018, they will be able to announce to this country that they've been working hard on solving the issue of pushing the issue of racism in the city of New Orleans while we're creating economic opportunities. So weaving together these opportunities, that's what I believe that the RTB is the essence of it is that for African American males, if you do not view this as an issue related to the country and related to all of what's happening in local communities, then you are missing the point that this country will not survive without paying attention to the needs of these young men. So I have a lot more that I could say, but I will stop there, and hopefully that we'll be able to engage in questions. Thank you.
I don't know whose idea was to put all of us together on this panel, but we're going to work it out. So the kindergarten teacher in me wants to have everybody stand up and shake the sillies out, because I see some of y'all falling asleep, but we just going to get into it. Let me first say to the organizers, thank you for extending this invitation. I bring you greetings on behalf of the President, the First Lady, and Secretary Arnie Duncan. The question was asked sort of what would we imagine when we think about the future? And for me, it's one in which we accept that in 20 years, we should not come back into this room and have the same conversation. We should even be having a version of this conversation. And so because themes and topics are nice, for me what I think about is moving from repairing the breach to acknowledging the importance, or being reminded of the importance of being not only my brother's keeper, but my sister's supporter too, to inherently appreciating and celebrating the fact that we are all our nation's keepers, right? That this is about tying together the thread that has run through all of the discussions we've had today and acknowledging that this is community work, right? We often like to say that it takes a village. To Susan Taylor's point, not just any village, but a smart, committed, and capable village. So we have to talk about how we move from there. So one, let me say this, and primarily Traby and I were just in Ohio, and I ended up saying on the panel that there are so many people, many of whom are our friends, who get paid to predict the rain. And so for me, it's really important that we stop talking about the things that we know aren't working in our community and highlight the assets, if only because the panel that happened before ours reminded us that often we focus on the negative to the deficit of ignoring the positive assets that are happening in our community. And so I want to remind you again that there's an inherent problem in accepting or perpetuating the fact that there's a crisis among black men. And to that point, I want all of the scholars in the room to stand up. All of the black men that are in school, stand up. The point here again is that we are not problems to be solved, but we are to be celebrated. Again, the point is that we are not problems to be solved, but we are complicated people that need to be celebrated. And so who am I and why am I standing in front of you? Anybody who knows me knows that I am passionate about education. I fought God for as long as I could before accepting that educators do God's work and stopped in my tracks. And I now have the great pleasure of serving our president as the first ever director of the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans. I know it's a long title and I don't have a whole lot of time, but I say that because it's important. Because far too often when we talk about black kids in education, excellence is missing. And with that in mind, I also want to acknowledge that there's some fellow Columbia alums in the audience, and we've been talking about networks and relationships. I see y'all. And so what we do with the initiative is focus on three things, and this is relevant both to the work of the initiative and a separate initiative called My Brother's Keeper, which has also been lifted up today, and I'll talk about both. John Wilson, thank you for your affirmation and enduring and unyielding support. And so one, we focus on the importance of having this conversation. We are all privileged people who chose on a weekend to get up, get dressed, y'all look really nice, and have a conversation about this, right? But we're privileged people. What we're talking about is how it is that we connect with those who don't have the luxury of the time or the resources or the wherewithal to sit in this space. So one, we need to instigate these conversations as often as possible at our kitchen tables and in our community centers. The second thing we need to do is recognize that there are assets in our community. I get tired of people when they say this, we don't know what works. We got to do more research. No, we just need to do more, period. And so we focus on highlighting individuals, programs, policies, and people that are doing things that are either showing promise or have evidence of effectiveness. The third thing we're doing is highlighting resources and strengthening networks in local communities. So the White House Initiative has a partnership with Ebony Magazine, and we produce 5 summits around the country. There are flyers outside. I encourage you all to take one. The first summit was hosted at Morehouse College by John Wilson and Bryant Marks. Later this week, we will be joining our brothers in Cozebach and Jackson, Mississippi. But the point here is that in each of these cities, what we're doing is those 2 things that I mentioned, highlighting the importance of having the conversation, reminding people that there are individuals and systems that are connected to this work, that are conspiring for the success of our kids, and then ensuring that when they walk out of that space, there's somebody that they can go to. So they don't just sit in a room and get excited, but then get defeated when they walk out and are reminded that there are a whole lot of challenges that they need to endure. Specifically as it relates to boys and men of color, My Brother's Keeper provides us with an opportunity to be reminded again that a lot of this work is already happening in our communities. There are lots of schools that don't get any of the attention that they deserve for celebrating and supporting our young men and boys. That's why this partnership with Cozebach is really important. To acknowledge to the point that I think Sean made, we aren't waiting for anything to happen. This is about celebrating what's working and finding ways to double down and do more where we know things aren't working. Again, thinking about moving into 20 years, there are at least 3 things that I think about that we need to celebrate in this space, sort of to the elders who are in here thinking, you know, what have we gained in the last 20 years? One, there's been a considerable amount of progress made in reframing the narrative. Less than 10 years ago, when I was an undergraduate student at Columbia, I had to defend my desire to write a thesis about reimagining black male identity. The first question was, what about the women? Right now we're in spaces where we acknowledge that there's power and precision. And we will look at most of the quality of life indicators across the spectrum. Boys and men of color are at the lowest rungs of those ladders. Now again, this isn't a conversation about being exclusive. It's also not a conversation about investing in our boys so that our women have somebody to marry. We also have to acknowledge that diversity with a capital D exists within our community as well. But it's about responding to the specific opportunities we have to meet our boys where they are and to support them as they grow. The second thing is about acknowledging that a lot of these assets already exist in our community. I think that this is appropriate as we have this conversation today in a year where there were so many other seminal things that have happened over the course of our history. When we think about Freedom Summer, a lot of the people that led those movements were younger than any of us in this room, right? Those assets still exist. Those experiences still exist. It's about us doing a better job of stepping out of our silos and doing the uncomfortable thing and talking to one another. The third thing we need to do is focus on things that we know that work. So I'm going to, before I take my seat, highlight 6 things that have been helpful in shaping the work of the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans. The first is acknowledging that if we keep having these conversations about what happens to our babies in kindergarten, that we should give this up. As Leah said, and what most of us know, learning starts at birth, and the preparation for learning starts well before birth. We have to start there. Spend more time with our babies, with our mothers and our fathers before our children are ever breathe the first air. Right? And if we start there, we can save money and resources we spend now trying to help them catch up. The second thing is literacy, right? You guys all know the data around 3rd grade, 8th grade reading levels. That's not even the concern at this point. What I want us to focus on is the fact that we know adults who are functionally illiterate. We ask ourselves why our babies can't read. It's because the adults around them aren't reading. And then we don't want to have those conversations. So I was at the Hamptons Ministers Conference. Some of you have heard me tell this story before, but there was a minister who stood up and asked me a question about what we were doing for literacy. Because his grown son, who works in a hospital, may kill himself consuming something that will cause him harm because he cannot read the label. And when I asked the man how often he had talked about it in the pulpit, he said to me, 0. We, as a community, have to get beyond not talking about the things that make us feel ashamed or uncomfortable. The third thing is, again, acknowledging this is an all-hands-on-deck enterprise, right? We should have conversations about acknowledging that educators do God's work. And far too often it's the case that we aren't talking to our kids about whether or not they've considered being an educator, or acknowledging that many of us are educators formally or informally. Now, to be clear, people often say teaching isn't rocket science. They're right. It's a lot harder. Teaching isn't for everybody. So if you can't teach, then mentor. Find some way individually or collectively to put your bodies on your kids and say to them, as Asa Hilliard said, I see the genius in you. I'm going to meet you with love and support you as you grow. The fourth thing we focus on is increasing the number of black folks that have 2-year, 4-year degrees, credentials, and certificates. I am not one of those people that believes that college is not for everybody. You graduate from college and then you tell me it's not for you, right? Think about it. It's often college-educated people that say that. We got to acknowledge our own privilege, right? It's just not fair for us to say this is okay for you, it's not okay for you. Support all of them and then let them make the decision at the point in time at which it's appropriate. The last thing we focus on, and this one is, I think, most important because it frames everything. And Susan, I'm going to look at you as I start this. But it's reframing the narrative. It is literally changing the way that we talk about and allow people to perceive us. We have to start telling the truth, the whole truth. So before I take my seat, I know I'm a Baptist preacher. I said I'm going to take my seat at least twice. I want to give you 8 myths that we need to bust, right? And raise your hand if you've heard somebody in the last month say there are more black men in prison than in college. It is factually inaccurate. The next time they say it or tweet it, hashtag receipts. Remind them that as Ivory Toaston has identified, there are 600,000 more black men on college campuses around this country. The footnote is that we are still overrepresented in the prison system. But we can't allow people to tell a lie that suggests that if you were an educator, primarily a white woman, you can take yourself off the hook. You don't have to do the work of reaching that young boy where he is because he's going to end up dead or in jail. It's just not true. And for those of you who have been in classrooms, you've seen how myths like that impact us. The second myth that we need to bust is that less than 50% of us are graduating from high school. Here's the note. If you don't know how a statistic was derived, you should not use it. According to a 2013 Education Week study, about 62% of African Americans complete high school. This is compared to 80% of white students, an increase of 30% in narrowing the gap. Here's the thing that I like more of us to talk about. In 2009 to 2010, the national graduation rate for black male students was 52%. The graduation for white students was 72%. That was the first year that more than half of the nation's black male in the 9th grade graduated with a regular 4-year diploma. And we still are recycling that old statistic. The next one, black males don't go to college. I done shown y'all that that's not true. Right? Each of you know black men who are in college in spite of all of the challenges that we receive. So here's a stat that I'd like you all to share. From 1976 to 2010, the percentage of black students enrolled in college increased from 9% to 14%. Now here's the kicker. During that same period, the percentage of white students decreased from 83% but 61%. Why are we the only ones experiencing a crisis? Follow the data. The next one, African American student athletes graduate at higher rates than their non-athletic black peers. It's not true. NCAA Division I college sports athletes graduate at a rate of 50.2% compared to 55.5% of their non-athletic peers. We got to start telling the truth. African American male students have the same opportunities as their peer. What we know and what the Department of Education and the Department of Justice have shown in the recent released CRDC Civil Rights Data Study is that black males are disproportionately impacted in significant and severe ways. We are policed, we are pushed out, we are expelled, we are surveilled. We are denied almost every opportunity we can to access the skills that we need in order to be successful. And in spite of that, we still succeed with a whole lot of grace. The next thing, African American males are underachievers. There's been black men before you all day that have bust that myth wide open, right? We can go down to Atlanta and find a whole campus of them, right? We just got to start telling the truth. The last one, black men don't go into service-oriented positions or fields. And this is one that I personally grapple with, right? I'm looking at a couple of my classmates who know that when we at Columbia started talking about going into education, I always say if I could paint, I would paint that moment when all of the feelings flushed out of their faces and they tried to find the words to say, but why? Right? Because that's not the message that we give to our kids, right? We don't say to them that no matter what you do, you're obligated to live your life in service to somebody else. That the greatest thing you can do is to support the development of somebody else who looks like you, who came from the same community that you did, who struggles with the same things that you are still struggling with to this day. And we've got to get out of our way. We have to acknowledge that for black men, education is one of the top 3 professions that they choose if they graduate from college. Now, the opportunity for us is to make sure that more of them graduate from high school prepared to go into and get through college. And that starts with seeing them. Moving past all this data, moving past all of the stories that people will have you believing about us, and seeing us for the complicated, graceful, God-fearing people that we are. Toni Morrison said it best in Sula. She called black men the envy of the world. We need to recognize it and celebrate it. Thank you.
Was there a remote that was down here? Oh, thank you, sir. The mic? All right. I'm gonna use my lapel. Okay. All right. No, I'm good. Yeah. Okay. All right. So, in my 8 minutes and 31 seconds, all right, we're gonna go through a lot. I got a lot of data I wanted to show. And we'll see, hopefully we can get through most of it. All right, so future of black males in higher education. My focus will be on higher education. And I just want to do something real quick. David mentioned standing up. I won't have you stand up, but I do want you to participate. So this is the Saturday between Good Friday and Easter, and I'm a Baptist preacher. And usually I preach either last night or tomorrow. I'm not going to do either because I'm traveling and doing things. So I want y'all to call and respond to me in the African tradition. Are you okay with that? All right, I'm going to show you 2 options on the screen. I want you to yell out who or what is better. Just yell it out. All right, young people, it's okay this time. You don't have to hold your breath. Yell it out. All right, if you know who I'm showing you. All right, here we go. Yell it out. Jackie Wilson or Sam Cooke?
Sam Cooke.
You all don't know who Jackie Wilson or Sam Cooke is? Yell it out. See, y'all too cool for school, huh? You just link. I need y'all to yell it out.
They were deferring to the elders.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry you didn't see it. Gotcha. All right, here we go. All right, you already know that one? Here we go. 4 Tops of the Temptations.
Temptations. Wow. New edition.
Marvin or Stevie?
It's Donny Hathaway. Donny Hathaway.
All right, good. All right, here we go. Beyonce or Alicia Keys?
Alicia Keys.
Beyonce Keys. All right. Next. Here we go. Carrie Underwood or Taylor Swift?
I'm with him.
That's
neither.
Response. I like the energy. Low
Rihanna.
response rate. All right, here we go. Next. Beethoven or Bach? All right. Hold on. Coltrane or Miles? I know you're confused. I can't. All right, I hear you. Biggie or Tupac? Biggie. What'd you say, Biggie? Yeah, New York. That's right, represent. Coldplay or Maroon 5? All right. Next. LeBron James or Michael Jordan? Okay. Kendrick Lamar or Meek Mills? All right, let's pause there. See, there's a lot of in the front, not so much in the back. All right, this is getting into the generational piece. PlayStation or Xbox? Finally, Mac or PC? All right, well, I have a Mac, but I'm running Windows. We can all get along, right? So why do I do this? Why do I show you these slides? So this is a quote. This is basically the foundation behind the Morehouse Research Institute and why we do what we do. It's a quote from Carter G. Woodson. As an educated black person, you need to have this book, The Miseducation of the Negro. It is a must-have. So he says, to educate the Negro, we must find out exactly what his background is, what he is today, what his possibilities are, and how to begin with him as he is and make him a better individual of the kind that he is. It is a participant-centered approach. So we start our analysis with the black male at the center, and then we look outwards from there. And that's what Carter G. Woodson, his approach to this is. So just like with some of you, I did that who's better, what's better. So I can reach, all of you had some response. So all of you are exposed to or like music. But to get to you or through you, I have to go through a different artist. I can talk to some of you about the Temptations and reach you. What if I could teach you a scientific concepts through a Temptation song, right? What if I could teach you the law of thermodynamics through a Meek Mill's lyric? I have to know you first
right, in order to get to you. So it's a student-centered approach in terms of how we go about doing these things. All right, real quick, you got a hint of this already, so I'll just show you some data because David's touched on this already. The answer to this is in terms of populations for black males. These get confused a lot of times, but the answer to this really is number 3. More black males in college, then the penal system, then the military, in terms of overall numbers, right? Those other two combinations are not true. Here, let's look at the data, right? So when we look at this, these are basically the buckets of life that young folks find themselves in after high school, post-secondary pathways, right? So either, right? So following the legend, you might die, incarcerated, unemployed, military, employed, or enrolled in secondary education. This is the column for African American males. 0.3% die, 9.9% incarcerated, 34.4% unemployed, 0.9% military, 21% employed, 33.4% secondary education. That's the breakdown. You see the other racial groups here as well. This is but this bar going across, what you see above the bar, constructive or productive choices. Below the bar, not so much. Why is that? What's going on? All right. And this is not a deficit approach. This is just descriptive. So in terms of the Morehouse Research Institute and what we do, we try to do a couple of key things. To serve as a national resource or clearinghouse that is a go-to entity regarding research and best practices on the affirmative development and achievement of black males. And that takes a variety of forms. So what we try to do is research. So that's what I'm going to emphasize today. We have national studies that we conduct that have included comparisons of African American males at HBCUs and PWIs. We've done an analysis of black male initiatives on several college campuses. We've looked at the key factors of college success for black males. We produced this report that was out on the resource table. This is a research brief, the state of undergraduate black males in STEM. It gives you all the numbers, the number of degrees, where they get their degrees, and so forth. On the back, it has the rankings of the top 20 institutions from which black males in STEM graduate, undergraduate BAs. Okay, so this will answer a lot of questions about STEM, black males, and so forth. Okay, the other piece real quick on the resource table is op-ed, why all African American males should go to college but probably won't. It's an adult thing. And it piggybacks on something that David said about is college for everyone. So if you could take a look at that when you have some time. So next piece we do is an annual report. In addition to the research, we have an annual convening, so we partner with the White House for this year's annual convening, African American males. We have innovative STEM pedagogy projects that involve mentoring and so forth, and we're thinking about a summer institute on black male achievement where K through 12 and college personnel develop a concrete plan to develop evidence-based practices that enhance the academic achievement of black males. Imagine coming to Morehouse. We know what works, as you already heard. And you arrive here for a week, stay for a week, and you leave with a plan in hand. You have national experts who walk you through best practices, who will guide you through creating a plan for your individual school or campus. All right, so it's action-oriented. So the convening is about sharing information. The Summer Institute is about practice and implementation. Okay, so snapshot of higher ed. You heard some of the data already in terms of where we are. This is sort of looking back over the past, the range of years from 72 to 2008. So you have gains. So yes, you'll hear people say, oh, there's more people in college than ever before, graduated from college than ever before. Yes, that's true. But you have to slice the data and understand relativity. So for whites, you see the gap went from 50 to 72%. That's great. For blacks, 45 to 56. For Hispanics, 45 to 64. You still have gaps. So everybody's going up, but to what degree, right? African Americans up by 11%. The other groups up by a higher percentage. So there are more black folks graduated from college than ever, but not to the same extent, or they're not on the same trajectory as other racial groups. In low income, you see the same thing here, big jump from 72 to 2008. High income, you also have a jump, so you still have the gap. So things are getting better, but we still have to contextualize it. Bachelor degrees attainment, very similar. You have increases over the years, 24 to 37%. Increases for blacks, 11 to 19%. Look at the gap. Gap still exists, even today, right? All relative. You have to look at this in the context of other groups. So I was going to have you raise your hands for this, but I'm running out of time. National 6-year graduation rate for black males. All right, so basically what you'll see in this graph going across is there is a male problem. Overall, 56% of males graduate within 6 years, 61% of females. And you look across each of these groups and you see a gap. The gap is most pronounced for African Americans, 9 percentage point difference. So it's 34% six-year graduation rate for African American males, but these other groups still are having some challenges as well. So there's an achievement gap racially, but there's also an achievement gap in terms of gender. Income-wise, not much is happening on the low-income side from 75 to 2008, 3 percentage point increase. Income is still playing a huge role, but income plays out differently with race. And my sociologist friends who are here, we can talk about that a little more. All right, so in terms of the gender differences for African Americans, 66% of bachelor's degrees that are given out are given to females, right? And that's, again, you see this gender piece across the board, most pronounced for African American males. So African American males are entering college at roughly 5.3%, which is proportionate to their numbers in the population, but they're not graduating at the appropriate rate relative to their overall population. And talking about the future, the for-profit piece. So there's basically 4 categories of colleges: for-profit, public 2-year, public 4-year, private 4-year. Look at black and Hispanics in terms of for-profit, 26%, right? And that number is on an incline. Now, what's happening at places like Harvard and MIT and even at several HBCUs, this online piece and how that's going to play out is very interesting, but we have to be very innovative and smart about how we implement some of these things. I have some great data. We have a national study of black males in college. We look at all this stuff. This is black male-centered. You're not going to see this on the census or Higher Education Research Institute or NESE or anything like that. We designed this with black males in mind. We ask about rap music. We ask about risky behaviors. We ask about tattoos. We ask about sagging pants. All sorts of things that are black male-centered, okay? And some quick data on this in terms of spending time. You ask a national sample of black males in college at freshman year, how they tended to spend their time. Listening to music was number 1, right? Socializing, texting, exercising, sports, and then we have studying down here. So they were reflecting on their senior year in high school. What we want to do in terms of innovative pedagogy is incorporate all of this where they are in their downtime here. And there are ways that we can do that in a way that we've already have evidence to show works. Okay, again, I was going to have you do some of these quizzes, no time for that. So real quick, we asked, so some of you may wonder about this, about what do some typical black male behaviors, right? Stereotypical black male behaviors. Wear a do-rag in public, wear a baseball cap in class, curse, say the N-word, call a black woman a hoe or a B, wear flip-flops in class, get into fist fights, allow your pants to sag so that your underwear is visible, right? And we asked them how often do they do that? Never, a few times a year, a few times a month, a few times a week, every day, and so forth. So you see the descriptors here. Some key findings in terms of the N-word and cursing, it's pretty universal. I could have a 4.0, I curse and say the N-word, 2.0, curse and say the N-word, right? GPA, in terms of, for black males who do say that, yes, but then you also see, in terms of reading non-required books, you see there's reading patterns, there's a distribution, there's variance. And not all black men sag. 72% of black men say they never sag, right? Now, hopefully they were being honest and there wasn't social desirability going on. All right, so moving on, before I get the super evil eye. Black males in college, that engage in reputational cool pose, right? We know Richard Major's work talks about cool pose. What does that look like? Sagging, do-rag, fighting, sort of reputational masculinity that other scholars have talked about. Those folks, when you see a cluster, the keyest cluster of behaviors like that, they tend to be more likely to have lower GPAs, curse, use the N-word, refer to women as H's or B's, think that others view African Americans in a positive way. Yes, that's somewhat counterintuitive. Be depressed, have lower self-esteem, engage in risky behaviors, and view African Americans negatively. So when you see that cluster of behaviors, that doesn't mean you go out on the street, you make a young black male sag his pants, and all of this stuff happens. No. It's a cluster of behaviors that represent a certain type of masculinity. Okay? So, and I'm just going to move to the last slide. Oh, black male initiatives in higher education. You all have various things going on at Harvard with black students and so forth. Black and nationally, black male initiatives, I study them. Basically, these are sort of the data. It's funded by grants for the most part, which is inherently problematic. And then what happens in terms of what they look like, these are the most popular characteristics of black male initiatives in higher education. Mentoring, 95% of them have a mentoring component. 89% of them have community service component. Lectures or invitations for special events, 84%. Study groups, 52%. Academic-based meeting study groups, 47%. Scholarships, and so forth. Okay. I know I'm going fast, y'all. I'm sorry. But I'm short on time, and Sean is looking at me. Okay, so here's some issues of black male initiatives. So if you're on the college campuses, here or anywhere else, here are some shortfalls to black male initiatives on college campuses. Lack of short and long-term data that document the impact. The data is weak with most of these initiatives because they're often just started by counselors or folks who care about students but don't have research or assessment backgrounds. Most programs have multiple elements but don't measure which element has the most impact. Many programs terminate when the grant ends. Many programs are personality rather than process-driven, so when a person leaves, the program might end. Lack of control group comparison. There's weak awareness of African-American male data. I've gone to campuses and said, what's your black male graduation rate? And they were stumped. So you want to understand how to enhance the outcomes for black males, but you don't even know the nature of the problem to a detailed extent. Lack of communication amongst various entities and lack of controlling for coincidental variables that just naturally occur in terms of development. So I'm going to skip this. This is all great. This is wonderful, wonderful data. All right, but I'll get to the last slide. This is the key practice. I know. All right, so here we go. In terms of the future and what things are going to look like, what you need to do. Assessment is key. You have to measure what you're doing. Formative assessment and summative assessment. If you don't know how to do it, get some help. Most folks have access to some social scientists, and as scholars, as researchers, we need to offer ourselves to the community for this sort of work. Assessment is key. Also, mentoring programs, mentoring works. You have to, assessment runs throughout all of these I'm going to mention, but mentoring does work. College success workshops, teaching life skills absolutely works. Self-regulation is a critical component. Self-regulation, self-control, willpower, discipline predicts academic achievement much more so than self-esteem and other psychosocial variables. Early alert system needs to be early. Don't wait to 3 exams and a final for faculty here. That's not the most effective model. You need to go to a quiz model, something that's more preemptive. Let's see, high expectations across the board, believing everyone can learn, developing institutional engagement. Students need to feel connected to the campus. Learning style assessments, kinesthetic, auditory, visual learners. Understand, students, you need to learn how you learn. And the task is to convert information into that format, okay? And I could talk to you about that using mnemonics and all sorts of other things. Assessment of career and life skills. Take assessment during your advisement freshman year. What am I good at? What do I love? What am I passionate about? What is your purpose? That's what true education is about, passion, purpose, and calling. Faculty development workshops. Many of our faculty do not, at many of our campuses, do not understand the psychology of our students, even at some of our HBCUs. High academic self-esteem. Students need to believe that they can do it. Some of them come to college with a high school mentality. Doesn't fit, okay? Finally, rigorous institutional self-studies. All of y'all in higher ed, your institutional research unit is critical. The faculty who are studying education, schools of education, and so forth, you need to know what's happening on your individual specific campus and slice the data by gender and by race to be informed and make decisions that really matter. An innovative and appropriate use of technology in and out of class, but maybe I'll get to that during the panel. Thank you for your time and attention.
Good afternoon. I'm going to ask them to play a clip that it's going to take up 6 of my minutes, and then I'm going to use 2 just to wrap it up. So if you can play the clip now.
Of culture as a strategy for social change, not just preceding social change. I think of it as a different experience. So I feel like that culture is a glue that keeps us in the same conversation together.
There is nothing more powerful than words and images to create and shape attitudes and behavior.
It's really important to change the general attitude and the attitude of the people themselves as to what can be accomplished.
It just seems to me there's assault on the black man, imagery.
As we look at this black male reimagined, I think there's so many different layers of this conversation, and I think what's missing, and I think what we try to do, is put ourselves in a position where there's this almost contagious optimism that the probability of success is there at every level.
We have a situation where the young people have all these external forces telling them who you are. You got kind of like 2 different images You know, if you're seeing a 6'6" black man on a basketball court, oh, he's friendly. He's Michael Jordan. You see that same 6'6" black man, 9 o'clock on 125th, you know, he's a killer automatically.
What does the black male look like? What do they assimilate to? What cultural drivers are they supposed to be buying into? How do they present themselves?
We have to come up with an aspirational idea of what we want the black male to be.
This is reality television. It is one of the dominant modes of television now for a variety of reasons, and the people who produce it openly say what we're looking for is stereotypes.
We have to allow for the self-construction, for the self-expression, so that we can see the myriad ways in which black males exist as human beings and not as stereotypes.
Black people, black men, but black people are phenomenal media consumers, phenomenal movie consumers.
We know that, but how come that doesn't translate?
It will translate. We just don't understand our power.
For the first time in our history, we are in a position to create our own images.
We have an ability with these artists and with these record companies and with these television stations to put forth to them whatever the community gives us.
Those of you who are in the business know the noise out there is fierce, right? I mean, you just are constantly competing with paid messaging that really wants to distract folk and get them thinking about something else.
Building a brand, particularly if a brand exists already, is a tough thing.
Absolutely.
And changing people's perceptions about that is tough, but it can be done.
I think that when you're talking about reimagining the black man, I think we got to start there with the product. We got to start with the black man himself and create real honest sort of stories about the success and the positive stories that exist out there.
The media is not broken. Television is not broken. It is doing what it's supposed to do, which is to disempower us and our families. They're not going to tell the stories I want to tell.
You know, we can tiptoe around the issue of racism or white supremacy, however we frame it, but it is at the crux of what we're trying to tackle within our structural institutions.
We cannot expect the media and people whose sole interest, not sole interest, but primary interest, is the bottom line, to be held responsible if we don't hold them responsible.
There are times where you can be a great journalist and a bad black man.
If somebody's always pointing you as black reporter to go to Harlem and find a drug dealer, and that is the truth that they keep pointing you at, then all the other truths see no light.
We can have all the resources that we want around this issue of reframing issues, improving the life outcomes of black men and boys. We can have the resources, but if those resources do not come with a literal renaissance and revival of hearts and minds on the community level, also on the policy level, that all those resources will not mean a thing.
Nothing really changes until we're able to not just fund things, but also influence people to see things in a different way, challenge people to participate in their communities in a different way.
Instead of saying, you're wrong for that, and that's it, you should say, you're wrong for that, but what's our solution? What are we going to do?
It's funny, when you put a young person in front of a responsible adult, you start to feel like while you're listening to something and you're looking at this young person, you could do something about it, you're trying to figure out what can you do.
We got a lot of work ahead of us, a lot of work to do. But I do think that what we have in our hands right now is a different world, because in fact we can connect to communities like we've never been able to do before. And in doing that, we can create links between those communities, and technology allows us to do that. But I do believe that one thing we've talked about a lot today, and something I care deeply about, and it's been a big part of my life, is that storytelling can really do that. It can be that big doorway when in fact you move people to a place where not only do they understand what you're asking them to take on, but you can move them to a point where they want to be actively involved in doing it, if you do it right.
Okay, knowledge is the key, but show me the lock. I got the scrawny legs, but I move just like Lou Brock with speed. I'm agile, plus I'm worth your while, 100% intelligent black child. I heard that when I was like 15 or 16 years old as an athlete, and for most of my life I always thought I had to be an athlete. And hearing those words over and over again had a profound impact on my life, and I just want to say thanks.
I've become convinced that we are going to win, and this is the moment to actually win. And I think it's more than wishful thinking.
Good afternoon again. My name is Rashid Shabazz. I'm with the Open Society Foundation's Campaign for Black Male Achievement. That clip took up 6 of my minutes, so that leaves me with 2. And what I was hoping that you would get out of that presentation briefly is one of the things, as I've been sitting here all day, Dr. Austin said I brought him out of retirement. So I apologize and hope that you give me this opportunity to thank you for all that you've done to allow us to be here today. Because the 20 years of this work, I actually know it's beyond 20 years. This is actually a legacy of work of freedom and liberation for our people since we were brought here on these shores. And so I think of a Jawanza Kajufu, who's not necessarily lifted up all the time. I think of a Hakeem Mabuti, who's my mentor with Thurwell Press, whose books ignited my passion. I think of the Nation of Islam, which I grew up in. I think of the Christian church I grew up in. So like I joke sometimes with Sean, if you've heard me sometimes you'll get Martin, sometimes you get Malcolm, depends on the day, how I'm feeling. I'm feeling a little Malcolm right now. But that said, and because I have 1.5 minutes left, what I just want to run through quickly is that I do believe that the future is bright. I do believe that our future is bright because in darkness, the only thing after it is bright. And that the future, as I've been saying to Sean recently, is that the future is now. And what I mean by that is kind of the Buddhist idea of mindfulness, that we have to submit ourselves into this moment and grasp it for what it is, rather than thinking about the future and thinking about the past. The fact that we're even in this room is a demonstration that the future is bright. And so I just want to keynote that, the keynote of our innovation that Dr. Austin was talking about. Our keynote as Black people is that we're innovators, that everything that we've come through is the fact that we're going to win. So I want to start with that premise, is not to, even though we're depressed, which I get, even though we're unhappy, which I get, even though I'm sad and I feel broken at times, which I am, I know we're going to win. And I say that because there are a lot of young people out there who look at us as hypocrites, because we sit in this room, and to Ron Ferguson's points is that we don't give them their North Star. We try to give them our North Star. And the fact is, what this whole thing about strategic communications for me is about telling our stories so you can tell your story. This isn't about Rashid. I'm happy to be up here. It's an honor to be up here. But I'd rather be home with my daughter, to be honest with you. You know, that's who I've been thinking about all day. It's my daughter. Black men and boys, I'm excited about. But I love my family. And I'd rather be at home not fighting this fight, but rather be at home raising my daughter. And so the reality is, we're at war. And that's what my mentor would say to me. If Hakeem Mabuti was here, is that we as Black people are at war. And if William Buster is saying we're going to talk truth, let's talk the truth. The fact is the moment we were brought over here on these shores, we've been at war. And I'm happy to have white allies. I'm happy to repair the breach and have dialogue. But I'm letting you know, my dialogue's with Black folks. That's who I love. That's what I think about. That's what I'm committed to. And so when you meet Rashid Shabazz, that's what you're meeting, is someone who loves humanity, but the starting point is Black people for me. And so that's not to say it's not welcoming or opening to community, but that's my North Star. That's what's in my heart. And so that's the starting point for Rashid, and why I think of a Marlon Riggs, why I think about the individuals who came into this work. Marlon Riggs, if you don't know the ethnic notions of color adjustment, his work was really what spoke to me and why we ended up coming to this space around communications. And so I'm just going to walk through quickly. This slide highlights our strategy. No, we did not stumble into this. Know that we're not tripping on these things. We are strategic tacticians trying to figure out how we win. And these are the ways in which we do it. We partner with Knight Foundation, with Brother Trabian. We partner with Kellogg on a number of our portfolio pieces. And we partner with all of you who some of the rooms, and if you're with the CBMA family, please stand up so we can recognize you. Ron Walker, Stephen Powell, Harlan, Ron Mincy, other individuals, Damon Hewitt. Damon, please keep stand up. Decker, stand up. Damon and Decker for a second. Damon's with the My Brother's Keeper initiative. He's been with, I'm calling him out, and I'm sorry, because now people got to run to you because they think you got $200 million. But the fact is, Damon is leading the work on behalf of Open Side Foundations, but he's the glue right now to all the work happening nationally with the foundations and philanthropy. So when we talk about this bridge, he's holding the gap right now for philanthropy. So that's critical. I want him to be recognized. And Decker's leading our Black Men and Boys work, our BMA fellowship with Echoing Green. I want to recognize him because some of what we're doing is around social entrepreneurship and empowering Black men so they can tell their stories, but more importantly, that they create that innovation, that keynote that you're talking about. So this slide captures our strategy. You just highlight it. If you have your camera, you can take a picture of the slide. I'm happy to pass it out as well or send it to you. But this is a timeline of activity that I'll send as well if you get my email of just from 2006 and just interactions of things that we've invested in or introductions. And it's important because to me, this is all divine work. And so when you think about the ways in which we intersect, the fact that my wife grew up with Leah Austin, and then my mother-in-law is telling me I need to talk to Bobby all the time, like those type of things are not set up. Like I couldn't predict that. I couldn't situate that. And I say that because this work takes spirit, and you have to believe there's something greater than you. Whether you believe it or not, even if you're agnostic or atheist, there's always the debate, what is? For me, I don't have that debate, but because I know, because I live it every day, right? And so when you look at this timeline, there's a capturing of a reality of what we've created in connection to this breach. And Sean says activity doesn't always mean progress, but this activity is tied to actual future. So our future now is bright because if you look at some of these investments, last night I went to a Question Bridge convening. We invested in Question Bridge. Question Bridge was here, not tied to this event necessarily, this repairing the breach, but there was a full room full of maybe 100 people talking about Black men and boys images. There's things, Travian talks about this vertical versus horizontal. We don't all have to always be connected talking, but now there are pockets. There's an opportunity for us to leverage our collective strength to really have impact. So the last piece here is these are the major investments we've had. Again, I'm not going to go through them. You can highlight them. But one I will highlight and I will pass out is around American Promise, a project that we're funding in partnership with Kellogg. It's a film around 2 African-American male youth and their parents who basically put them in a private school, and they look at the trajectory all the way from kindergarten to 12th grade, and they graduate. And the story highlights a lot of things that happens in the classroom, from implicit bias to all these other things that occur. So in terms of strategy, some of the things that I just want to lift up quickly. I've already noted that this timeline is focused on what I would call the bright spots. Sean and I always talked about when we started this work, focusing on the bright spots was a book that I used to read early on called Shift by Chip and Dan Heath. And in that book, it talks about the power of looking at bright spots and looking at the power not coming from philanthropy or from individuals, but the individuals in the communities themselves. And Travian will talk more about that. But this idea of not just looking at bright spots, but looking at the conscious blind spots, thinking about who's got to tell you when your blind spots are there. The other piece is connecting the dots. As I sit here, one of the things in terms of the future, we can't let this happen again. If Dr. Austin's here, if Dr. Wilson's here, this connect needs to happen. There's something that happened between this work that's happening over the last 5 years, and we did try to bring you in, but there needs to be something that doesn't allow for that as maybe Sean and I move out or others move in. How do we make sure that transfer of information is there so we're not repeating the wheel? Because that's how I feel, we're reinventing a lot of this stuff over and over and over. And so just the last thing I'll say, and I'll wrap up because I know I'm way over time, is that we need to remain nimble. The future is now. We need to stand on the shoulders of our ancestors. And there's just so much that has been shared today that I'm grateful for just being in this room, even though I would rather be home with my daughter, I'll be honest. I am grateful to be in this room because the history and the richness of the connections, and just seeing Dr. Wilson up there. You still look great. So you haven't put on no weight, so I need to follow your routine. But that was a really wonderful opportunity to see all that history and richness. And the last person I would just like to lift up is if Dr. Lonnie Grenier can stand up, because when we were at the foundation, we didn't really talk much about this, but Lonnie Grenier wrote a book with Gerald Torres called The Miner's Canary. And in that book, she posits, and there's a lot of debate about it, and I've heard her talk about it in different ways, and she may have some critiques of it now. But the simple aspect is looking at the broad statistics facing African-American males and using it as a way to let us know what could be possible for this country if we don't correct that. That the idea that these black males are the canary in the mine, that they can let us know how sick or how damaged our society may become. And so one of the things that struck me when Dr. Austin was talking is I do agree about dialogue, because I do care about my white brothers, I do care about my white sisters, but I don't want that to happen because they're starting to hurt. Right? I want it to happen because they care as much and love as much as I do for them as they should for us. And so now that they're hurting, that shouldn't mean that somehow we need to somehow help them solve their wounds. They need to also take up some of that responsibility with us. And so I agree with the dialogue, but I also believe that, like, because you're hurt and you're fearful of what's happening and crumbling around you, because Ukraine's happening, there's a lot of global things that we are not taking into this conversation. Doesn't mean that we need to somehow now solve their wounds just by ourselves. So I agree with dialogue, but I agree with dialogue with the context of self-love, self-improvement, and self-advancement, and making sure that we are self-determining. And so that's the last thing I'll say. And I'll just say that Seize the Moment was the publication I wrote in partnership with my colleague. I'll pass it out. And Travian, I apologize, because I know that you have a lot to say.
You got me excited.
All right. Okay, Travian aside. That's good. I'm going to pass this out.
Did you hear that, brother, man? Woo! I'm going to ask my brother Shaka Senghor to also come up to the stage. So, they say I've been asked to bring you home. Look, I have rewritten my comments 7 times since coming in this morning, but I really am just going to focus on a couple themes I want to leave you with. First of all, seeing how many millennials are in this group, I'm going to tell you, most of my comments are directed to you. I was a 20-something, 20-odd years ago when a bunch of folks were telling me that, we messed up the world and we got all these challenges. We're going to tell you how to fix it. And I was thinking, well, if you messed it up, I mean, why am I? Which didn't earn me a lot of friends, but, I'm still here. So a couple things I want to leave you with. One is, it's time for a new, true story about black people in this country. It is true that there are challenges and deficits and all that kind of stuff. Like, that's true. But there are other truths. Let me point them out to you. Some folks up here have been to church before, right? So I'm going to ask you to turn quickly to the person sitting next to you. Turn to your neighbor. This will only take 30 seconds. Turn to your neighbor. Okay? I want you to look intently at the person across from you just for a few seconds. I want you to focus on them. And here's what I want you to do. Focus on the person next to you and try to notice everything you can about what is wrong with this person in front of you. Okay. All right. Okay. All right, you can stop. Okay, you can stop. There's a reason that I do this, because we have to get to some truth, all right? Everybody laughs. I've done this many times. Everyone laughs. Everyone feels uncomfortable. And why do you feel uncomfortable? You feel uncomfortable because it is just plain wrong to look at somebody, and the first thing you do is try to figure out everything that's wrong with them. But when we talk about our brothers across the country, when we talk about black men, what is the first thing that we do? except to identify what is wrong with them. This is not an accident. This is a real problem. Why is it a real problem? If you add up what you have been taught about black men in this country, you can reach only one conclusion. They are detrimental to the future of this country. Why do I say that? What is the positive stereotype if you are Asian? The positive stereotype if you're a black woman. Black women contribute, backbone of the family, all that stuff. If you're Latino, right? Hardworking, whatever. What's the positive stereotype for black men in general? That's all you got. That's it. If you're not dribbling or singing, you are a threat to everybody else's future. That story's got to go. We're not going to deficit model our people. It's wrong to identify somebody by their challenges. Everybody's got challenges. It's wrong to identify somebody by their challenge. You got people walking around with a false impression. There's a research psychologist named Daniel Kahneman. He did the background work for what became behavioral economics, but groundbreaking stuff. He's literally considered the father of this behavioral economics. He's a Nobel Prize type dude, but the point is, Daniel Kahneman talks about a very simple psychological thing called a cognitive illusion. And it's based off of a simple idea that what you see, as far as your mind is concerned, what you see is all there is. So what is it that you see? Right? Particularly those of us in the boomer generation. Actually, I'm not a boomer, but close enough. I'm a Gen Xer. But particularly folks in the older generation, what you see is all there is. So let me ask you a question. How many people here have heard statistics that say 50% of black kids graduate or drop out, I should say. 50% drop out. We've heard that kind of stuff. Actually, I'm going to get you involved. Don't sit here and look at me. I'm going to ask you a question. How many of you have heard that black unemployment is much higher than white unemployment? Yeah, it's easy. Okay, what you see is all there is. How many of you have heard that black folks, black boys in particular, are dropping out of high school and dropping out of college, right? Come on, don't be shy, right? What you see is all there is, right? How many of you have heard that black poverty is higher than, other poverty, right? Or higher rates than other folks, right? Again, what you see is all there is, right? So if this is what you know about us, then of course, who do you think we are? What options do you have? How many ways can you tell our story? How many of you have been told, whether you're young or old, that you're going to have to work twice as hard to get half as much, Somebody thinks they're preparing you for some productive view of the world by convincing you that the world will cheat you out of half of your effort, right? This is the story we tell. The story you tell creates the world you'll see. So we have to tell a new true story. And by the way, you do have to work twice as hard to be successful. Wait. Everybody does. The person who's still grinding when the rest of y'all are sleeping is going to win. That's just the way it is. Not just because you're black, not just because you come from a certain background. That's just the way it is. Anybody who's reached the top works hard. So let's do that. But I said I was directing my comments to the millennials, and here's why. When we were looking at what we could do to change the narrative, improve the future, do all these things around black men and boys, we worked not just with researchers like Chip and Dan Heath and folks who are doing all this amazing stuff in academia. We also went and worked closely with probably the world's largest marketing firm, global marketing firm, right? If they're not number one, they're in the top 3 around the planet. It's Ogilvy and Mather. And we talked with those folks about what do you do around narrative and how do you insert yourself in cultural conversations and what's really going on. And they gave us an analysis of what's happening in the world that I'm going to share with you that makes a huge difference, particularly if you're a millennial. What they pointed out was, writ large, particularly in the United States, the baby boomer generation is also the civil rights generation. And that generation made significant progress by responding to significant crises, right? And they learned how to interpret and to motivate through the crisis narrative. They won't even try to get you excited without telling you that the house is on fire, right? They're not going to excite you about the future. They're going to excite you about your need to survive. One of the things about crisis narratives is that it always has in it this idea that the highest goal ultimately is to achieve what basically amounts to breaking even, survival. You can recognize crisis narrative people because they'll tell you how important it is to achieve equality, to close gaps. They'll tell you stories about, one of their highest goals if you're an environmentalist is sustainability, which again just means breaking even, as long as you can survive. There's another way to tell the story. So Be Me, which is the organization that we started, is about building caring and prosperous communities inspired by black men. Is this thing working? Would you go forward one more? One more. Again. Okay, thank you. We work entirely from an asset narrative. Asset approach obviously does not start with the problem, but it starts with a vision of what you want to create. Rather than trying to be fixers of problems, we want to be builders of communities. So let me play this out for you a little bit. I asked you a minute ago, how many of you know the negative stats about black folks, dropout rates, et cetera? Raise your hand if you know how many black males have their college degrees in the United States. Okay, there's 2, 3, okay. Bobby wrote it down somewhere, but I got you, okay. Raise your hand if you have any idea of how many black males, or black folks, but black males create businesses in the United States. Look around. Raise your hand if you have a sense of how many of our brothers serve this country in uniform. What I'm trying to point out to you is that for whatever reason, you can only tell our story one way. You can only tell the story of the demise and the threat and the need to address black men lest they destroy our future. We have to change that. You will not produce any productive outcomes with a deficit frame. Earlier in the day, you may have heard people share data that show that after X number of years of trying from this frame, no real change. It's not a growth model. And believe it or not, it's not even a survival model because you can't survive if you won't grow. So we think more about an asset frame. And just to answer some questions I raised, there are obviously more black men in college than there are in prison, but there's over 3 million black male right now who have college degrees. In fact, between the ages of 18 and 24, 39% of black males have college degrees, right? So if we're talking about what's normal, that's about as normal as anything, right? When we talk about black males as assets, this is not to be nice. We're not being hyperbolic about this. It's not a kind thing. 25% of black males are already military veterans. I'm talking about the adults, obviously. 25% of adult black males have already served their country in uniform. Another 400,000 are on active duty. That means that almost a third of the black men in this country serve and protect this country. When you think about business creation amongst black folks is growing at 2.5 times the rate as the national average. So now you have a people who serve and protect. You have a people who are enterprising. When it comes to giving, black people give to charity 25% more than white folks across all economic levels. So let me help you out now by trying to wake you up, because I realize y'all might have to move a little bit. I need like a real honest show of hands here, because there's a pretty dominant perception, and it's not based entirely on fantasy. There's some fact to some negative perceptions. So just raise your hand if you personally know a brother who's taken a life. Yeah, this is an engaged group. Y'all should have, y'all should connect. Oh, I'm sorry, kill someone else, not themselves. But yeah, but nonetheless, it's a good number, right? And this is a group that's very engaged and very concerned. So it's a reality. It happens. Now I want you to raise your hands if you know a brother who owns a business. Even more hands. I want you to keep them up if you know a brother who owns more than 2. Or you know more than 2 brothers who own businesses, yes. We need to tell a new true story. It's true that death and murder happens. It's more true that enterprise and entrepreneurship happens. You just demonstrated that. Let me make it a little bit more interactive. I mentioned the military stats. Some of you might not believe me, so I want you to do this. If your feet are crossed or there's something underneath your feet that you stand on, then uncross them, because you're going to have to stomp your foot to make this work, right? No, just to get a sense of what's going on here. Just stomp your foot one time if you know a brother who is in the military. Twice if you know 2. 3 times if you know 3. What is our normal? What is our normal? I want you to clap your hands once if you know a brother who helps others just because he can. Twice if you know 2. 3 times if you know 3. 4 times if you know 4. I could probably count to 100 and I'd just get a standing ovation. I'm just trying to tell the new truth. We got to tell a new true story. These facts are just as factual as those negative facts, but how often do you hear them and how much do you focus on them? Because what you focus on has power. What you see is all there is. I'm going to close my section of the comments by pointing out that Be Me tells 3 stories. Would you go back to the one more? So our mission is to build caring and prosperous communities inspired by black men. We break the mission down into these categories. You don't have to memorize the slide. I'm just sharing it so you understand. We actually go to leaders of things with these stats and facts and stories about what real brothers are doing in real places from all different walks of life. That's what we call our air game. Our ground game is about going on the ground in real communities, supporting brothers, no matter what status they come from, to do what they believe is important to do to help build better communities. And our growth game is about plugging in anyone who cares about these communities, any race, any sex, who cares about building community. We plug them into the network, and we try to make sure that they have access to assets, because we all need that to thrive and survive. And the way these stories break out when you get down to it, our narrative, the new true story, starts with black men as assets. Recognize that black people are unlimited, and ends with the fact that we're all better together, right? All race, all colors, all sex. That's the way it has to be. So just like if I was a preacher, I'd ask you to say, assets? See, now y'all sleeping, man. Come on. I'm not going to get off the mic till you wake up. Assets. Assets. That's better. Unlimited. Unlimited. Together. Those are the 3 narratives, and we're on the ground proving it. I'm going to pass the mic to my brother, Shaka Senghor, and one thing I'll point out to you about our approach. Be Me funds guys on the ground and in different walks of life who are doing things that matter. But again, since we start with this assets, we believe black is unlimited, we believe in better together, then you'll notice we don't actually call folks that we work with participants or any of that kind of stuff. It's just brothers and sisters. It don't matter what race you are. But it's funny, the Be Me guys, the people we funded and the folks we work with, they just started doing this. We didn't assign the language. It's just what we call each other. And before Shaka comes up, I'm going to ask, because we talk about this asset framing, we were serious on it. David and I have been tag teaming this last couple of weeks at conferences. But we're real serious about it. So I'm going to ask anyone who's worked with Be Me in the past, would you just stand up for a second? Because I want people to get a sense. I know you two in the audience, but come on. Amanda, Malcolm, those of you at OSF, I see Donna over there. Just stand for a quick second. Okay? No, stay up. The reason I'm drawing attention to these folks is because in our space, the philanthropic space, you don't get paid until you denigrate someone. You have to first identify them as a problem, a threat, a disadvantage this, a poor that. Like, you have to tear people down before you can build them up in our space. But there's a whole segment of us who have rejected that. Dr. Austin led off rejecting that 20 years ago. But there's a whole segment of us who reject that notion, and we believe in the asset frame. So I'm going to, thank you folks. So I'm going to ask my brother Shaka to come up, and before he do, just repeat 3 words after me. 1, asset, unlimited, and together.
All right. First of all, it is a great honor and privilege to be here at Harvard, to be among so many gracious luminaries, and to be a representative of Be Me. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey with Be Me, but I'm going to tell it to you in a reverse sequence of accomplishments. First of all, I'm a very, very proud black man, and I emphasize that point. I'm also a very optimistic and hopeful black man, and I'm going to illustrate why. March the 20th, I received a standing ovation at TED's 30th conference. Y'all can applaud that. That's cool. That's cool. Trust me, it's not easy to do. January, I started teaching at the University of Michigan.
And I know we got the Morehouse and all the special guys here. Y'all can applaud that as well. This fall, I was nominated for TED, for the TED Prize. It's $1 million prize, global prize. I was one of the 20 finalists. Obviously, I didn't win, because otherwise I'd be dressed like Sean Dove. Going back a little further, last year I received a fellowship at MIT Media Lab. Now, I know we're on Harvard campus and there might be a little tension there, but I'm here in Boston all the time. Take it back a little further, 2011, I received the first inaugural Be Me Leadership Award. Before all these accomplishments, I had walked out of prison for the first time after serving 19 years of my life. So it was like exactly about 1.5 years after I walked out of prison that I received the Be Me Leadership Award for the work that I started doing when I came home. Yeah. During my 19 years in prison, I went through every phase of it. Served a total of 7.5 years of solitary confinement, but the one thing that was consistent was inspiring words from black men. Malcolm X, Mandela, they were kind of like my conscience. So while I was thugging it out on the yard, I had Malcolm on one shoulder, like, bro, you can be something, you can do something. And I began to develop this idea that there was no limit to what I would accomplish or could accomplish if I was ever released from prison. And I started working, grinding, assessing, analyzing. And so I started writing. I didn't know how I was going to get my work published, but what Malcolm told me is that if you want to do it, you can make it happen. So I saved the money I earned in prison and started my own publishing company. Before I got released, they sued me because I started my own publishing company. That was a great excuse for me to go back to my former lifestyle. Went to the parole board 3 times, got denied the first 2 times. Great excuse to give up. Got out of prison, started selling books out of the trunk of a little Honda Civic. I ain't had no money, nobody would employ me, grinded out. A lot of rejection came with that. Great excuses to go back. But instead I forged ahead and I used my experience to mentor kids in the community. As a result of that, people in my community was like, hey, you heard about this Be Me Leadership Award? I don't know nothing about that. You know, I was just getting connected to technology and social media, and I was coming out of a cave-like existence. But I continue to hear this in my community. We nominated you for this award. We nominated you for this award. And then when I looked into it, it said, if you can do anything in the world, what would you do if you was to win this award? And I was like, man, I would do the ideal mentoring program that I always dreamed of. And I put it in the universe and let it go because honestly, I felt like I would continue to be judged for my past. That nobody else give me an opportunity to give me a break. And so when it was announced that I was a Be Me Leadership Award winner, it was one of the proudest moments in my life. And it came with a pretty decent grant at that time, considering I had just came home, driving that little Honda Civic. But more importantly, it connected me to opportunities for me to be my true self, for people to see the value in me as opposed to hold me hostage to my past. And that's the legacy that Be Me represents. And the great thing is that I'm not the only brother. We have 70 leaders that come from all facets of life, like Clement Brown, who's a local designer who he actually bought his own shop right in the hood, and he teaches kids how to design clothes. Got another brother named Eddie Connor, got diagnosed with cancer at 15 years old. And right now he teaches boys how to utilize literature to advance the cause. Everyday brothers. Though my story may seem extraordinary, I'm one of the most ordinary guys you're ever gonna meet. I'm actually kind of ghetto, really. But I say all that to say this is that we limit ourselves when we allow other people to define who we are and what we're capable of. People always ask me, they're like, bro, how did you go on and accomplish so many things? Because I didn't set no cap on what I was capable of doing. Like my mission is when I mentor kids, I dare somebody tell me that they can out-hustle me. Can't be done. You know what I'm saying? And if you can do it, I'm just gonna go that much harder. So that's the type of men that's in the Be Me Network. great brothers, humble brothers, go-getters, brothers whose budget started off with hope and love. You know, the work that we do in our community, we don't look for nobody to come rescue us. We don't look for nobody to come bring us no cash. We get out and make it happen. And it's fortunate and it's a blessing when we do have organizations that step up to the plate and make those things happen. But trust me, we're going to make it happen anyway because there's no budget greater than love and hope. Peace, y'all.
Let's give all of our panelists another round of applause, please. Wow, really wonderful. I know I didn't do a good job holding them to their time, but it was just really powerful. And I've been asking the question lately in this work, how do you quantify hope? And I just saw and I just heard that in everyone in this panel. I think we have time for 2 questions before we have to move on with the agenda, and we thank everyone for their patience. So really quickly, 2 questions, and Rashid Shabazz is sitting right here if you have a question for him. Yes, sir, come to the mic. Okay, Mike, then one more after that.
Okay, good evening. My name is James Matwar, and I'm actually from the Houston Independent School District in Houston, Texas. And my question is for the gentleman from Morehouse. You kind of alluded to the fact that social economic status with the African American students. And one of the things that I see, I've been in Houston for 26 years, it seems like there's a larger gap when the socioeconomic status comes into play for the African American male. Have you seen that in some of the research you've been working with? And if you have, what can we possibly do about it?
So you speak in terms of just income level?
Yes.
Okay, between racial groups?
Yes. Is there a bigger disparity between the African American males?
Yeah, so that's sort of complex. So what happens is there is, all right, so if you're looking at blocks of age ranges, right, then you'll have different answers. So if overall the difference between black women and white women, black men and white men, actually the gap is smaller between black men and white men. It may seem counterintuitive, but actually more black men, there are about 75,000 more black men who make over $100,000 than there are black women. Black women are more educated than black men in terms of college degrees, but in terms of income, in terms of the averages, black men are actually faring better. So, and so you can talk about unemployment rates. Yes, unemployment rates are higher, right? But we know this across racial and gender groups that men are going to make more money than women, you know, on average, even if it's for the same job. So you have higher unemployment rates for black men, but if you're looking at income on average, there's differences. So that's why.
He's talking about the correlation between that and student achievement.
In early education, the achievement level is what I talk about. When they're in school, do you see a bigger gap?
The correlation between income and achievement.
American in, not in the upper level graduate courses or college. I'm talking about in regular public education. Is there a bigger gap if I'm poor African American in public schools compared to other groups?
Slightly, yes. So when you're at the lower ends of poverty, so poor kids do not do well in school across the board, right? Poor black kids do slightly worse than poor white kids. That's true, but the gap is smaller at the lower end. So the poverty piece plays a role. It's oftentimes confounded with race, but yes, the gap is smaller there. And as was talked about earlier, the slopes increase. So as you go up the socioeconomic ladder, the gaps actually increase. But at the lower levels, it's not a huge difference.
Okay, I can get together after this. And
right. Sorry about that. I'm sorry, I completely misunderstood your question.
One more question before we thank our futurist panelists. No?
Let me respond to that one as well. And the point here is that Gloria Latson-Billings, who's a professor at Wisconsin, frequently says that the most neglected person in the public education system is a high-performing black student, right? And so I think rather than thinking about where there are gaps and then segmenting or disaggregating based on income, we need to acknowledge that all of our kids suffer, right, no matter where they are. There are sometimes instances in which, because of income or other access to capital, you'll find us in spaces where we are presumed to have better access to higher quality teachers or more resources, but the cost of achieving in that space for students of color tends to be considerable. And part if we just think about the isolation that students of color find themselves experiencing in that space.
That's question.
So my name is James Mack, and I'm a Youth Build graduate from Columbus, Ohio of 2008.
Congrats.
And we have 263 youth builds across the nation, right? And so we are doing a lot of work with helping impoverished youth in low-income communities transform their lives around, as you all know if you heard a little bit about it today, in 46 different states. So how can we get connected with all of you so we can help these young people that we are helping out in Youth Build?
So I won't answer that question, but I will say that a way that we can collectively help to increase access to programs like Youth Build is to go vote, right? So this is me in my pedestrian space, because as a political official, I can't tell you who to vote for. But I can say, based on history, that the Workforce Investment Act, which is the federal piece of legislation that authorizes Youth Build and a number of other programs, including funding for adult basic education, has not been reauthorized for almost 20 years. The chair of the committee responsible for that legislation, Virginia Fox, was from one of the Carolinas, said in a public meeting at a U.S. Conference of Mayors Committee that if she were queen of the world, there would be no workforce investment system, in spite of the fact that a significant number of constituents in her district benefit from it. The point here, again, is that we are often asleep at the wheel, generally when it comes to elections, but especially in midterm years. I spent a year working in Nevada, where there were a lot of people who showed up to get a T-shirt or something with Obama's face on it, but didn't register, who missed out on the opportunity to make sure that that state, who suffers significantly because of the public education system, the high mobility, and the lack of business opportunities generally, they allowed that to manifest itself. So I say that not jokingly, but the first thing that we need to do this year is to vote, and to make sure that there are people in office who understand the importance of those programs, who will invest in them as well.
So can I speak on that? I think one of the things that if you were to do an analysis of the most successful Youth Build sites, there are a couple of things that would probably raise up. The diversity of the supporters in that particular community, whether that's business, government, public sector, private sector, folks on the ground. And what we have to do is, because I'm familiar with a lot of Youth Build work, is that if you focus on what's happening in those places and getting those folks engaged on the ground in those communities that are surrounding Youth Build or the potential to bring Youth Build there, what David is saying will build upon what's already the power, which is the people in that place to drive that. If you're going to hear me talk about anything, it's going to be the belief that the power rests in those folks on the ground. And Youth Build is successful. I've seen it when it's successful, when those folks already in that place wrap their arms around it, regardless of what sector they come from.
All right, Trabian, I'm going to give you the last word.
No, real quick. I know Dorothy, so we're going to end up partnering with Youth Build. But even if you don't want to wait for that, text brother to 96,000. That's brother to 96,000 at BME, and we'll plug you to the BME network.
And I think you bring up a really good point, and I don't know if this is possible with the organizers of the conference of distributing a contact list or email so we can all network and be connected. We don't know all who's in the room. We haven't met everybody, but that's a missed opportunity if we can't get connected and follow up with that's possible. All right, Dory, I'm going to do one more in the back. Is that Professor White? All right, so gotta allow Professor White. This is the last question.
So I'm 81 years old, so that makes me one of the oldest Negroes in the room. And I'd have been through some of everything, starting out in a one-parent home back in 1932. But I was working with some brothers on a prison release program about 6 months ago, and we were sitting down in a group, and they laid out very clearly what they needed to do to rejoin the workforce, to reconnect to family life, and to become a positive force in the community, like we heard from the brother. And these brothers were, say, about 35 years old and had done on an average of 12 to 13 years in the place. So I closed my eyes and I tried to think, how come they can see things so clearly now that they're in their 30s and have spent 10 years in prison, 10 to 12, and couldn't see it when they were 18 and 19? I mean, what transpired that they would have to go there to get that clear vision. Any thoughts?
Yeah, in my experience of 19 years, most of the guys that I went to prison with were relatively young. Yeah, most of the guys went to prison when they were relatively young. What I found consistently is that most come from backgrounds of child abuse, sexual abuse, and other type of abuses that they weren't able to deal with at that young age on their own. A lot of post-traumatic stress disorder. I myself was shot at the age of 17. My reaction to being shot was to carry a gun every day. And again, when I got into a conflict, I decided to shoot first as opposed to being shot. And that seemed to be the consistent story for most of the males that I was incarcerated around. And then there's also the brain development issue, which we don't talk about enough when you think about juveniles who are being sentenced to indeterminate or life sentences. We're not addressing that issue. Honestly, we're not addressing issues of post-traumatic stress disorder. In our community, we're not honest about child abuse that takes place in the home and how that manifests outwardly. So it's a full range of things that takes place in terms of that growth, access to information. I didn't know there was so many brilliant, great black writers until I was actually incarcerated, and that's unfortunate, but it's also a condemnation of the school system that a lot of us come from and that we don't address in our community. I mentor in schools that actually look worse than the prisons that I served my time in, and those are things that have gone unchecked for so long, and it's one of the reasons that I share my story so freely, because I think it's important to put a human face to what mass incarceration looks like. Typically, when we deal with people who are incarcerated, we deal with those who are exonerated or those who were sentenced or accused of being guilty when they weren't. But we forget that 98% of the guys who are incarcerated are guilty, and that 90% of them will return to our community, and that we have a choice in terms of what type of men and women actually return to our community. So it's a full range, but I'm very open to a more thorough conversation with whoever about the issues.
Yeah,
Thank you, Shaka. Can we give our panels, we're going to have to end right now for time. Give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you.
So it's been a long day. I think we've heard a lot of good speakers. And I think one of the big things that we need to take from what we just heard from David, namely David John and Traven Short, is about truth. I want to give another shout out to my young men in the front from Bard College, I think, who represent that truth that we're so desperately talking about. I also want to bring another young man that's traveled, got up at 3 o'clock this morning to hop on a train from Maine to come down here and speak with us. I met this young man in Professor Ogletree's class just this week, and I was so impressed with him. I asked him to come speak. His name is Muhammad Noor. I met him through Seeds of Peace. He is a junior currently. He's been his class president for the last 3 years. He's a junior in high school. He started the Model UN at his school. He also sits on his school board. But I think he represents that truth that we are looking for. And that truth that needs to be spoken about our young men. I want to bring him up right now, put our hands together, and welcome Muhammad Noor.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Okay, that's really good. Okay, I have your attention. So, my name is Muhammad Noor, and I'm a junior at Deering High School in Portland, Maine. Like he said, I had to get up at 3 in the morning because this is a really great thing that got put on today. So I'm just really honored to be here, just to be in a room full of determined and distinguished leaders who are really committed to making a positive change in their communities. So I'm just really humbled and honored to be here today. Before I introduce our panel, I just want to share a few things with you guys, if that's all right. From an early age for me, my mother has instilled into me the value of education. She has always said time and time again that education is the key to success and that knowledge is the most important tool to create change. Now, I'm so fortunate that my mother instilled that value of education into me so early on and really created a stable home environment for me. But sadly, some of my friends weren't so lucky. In particularly, some of my black friends. Sadly, a good portion of the friends I grew up with are either in jail, they either left the city or the state, or a few are even dead. So I'm just so sick of this cloud of ignorance that we as a society create to conceal the problems that young black men face every day. I'm sick of it. How many more young black men have to be in jail for our society to realize that a segment of the population is struggling? How many more Trayvon Martins is it going to take for America to get up and do something? I'm not going to wait. And for you guys who are here today, I think you're not going to wait either. And this conference, Repairing the Breach, is just a platform to create that change, to save our young black men. And the only way to change the societal, systemic, and economic problems that young black men face, in my opinion, is through education. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said that the function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of a true education. And I strongly believe that a true education can be the salvation to the problems that young black men and just our country can solve those issues. So I have something to ask of all of you here today. All the educators, all the lawyers, all the practitioners, all the philanthropists. What I ask you to do is to keep doing the great work that you're doing. And also when you go back to your respective communities, to help young black men and just help young people in general get a quality education, because that transformative change that you help create not only allows these men to prosper, but allows the whole country to prosper. For when one of us succeeds, we all succeed. Now, with the introductions. Now I would like to introduce our distinguished panel. First, Dr. Austin, who spoke earlier this morning and was fantastic, so let's give him a round of applause. Second, Mr. Sean Dove, who was just recently, who still hasn't got up from his seat, I believe. And last but not least, Professor Charles Ogilvie. He is a professor at the Harvard Law School and founding and executive director for the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute for Race and Justice. Professor Ogilvie has also authored several important books on race and justice. The most recent one called Life Without Parole, America's New Death Penalty. So join me in welcoming our distinguished panel.
I'm going to stand up, if you don't mind, to moderate this panel. I hope you can hear me from this microphone. Let me first send my congratulations and praises to Mohammed Noor, who spoke at my class just this past Monday. And he and the students from the Seeds of Peace will be back at Harvard Law School this coming Monday. I saw Tim Phillips somewhere, one of the, oh, there he is. Maybe he left. I saw Tim Phillips. There he is. Okay. Who will be speaking as well. So all of you are welcome. The classes are free and open to the public. And he's already introduced two of the individuals on the panel today. Let me just say a couple of words to get us started. You know, there are distinguished people here, and I don't want people to think that the fact that we're talking about boys that we forgot about women. The reality is that we have to talk about the family and what the family means, and the idea of having a 21st century family. And I'm so happy to have gotten a degree in college with honors at Stanford before coming to Harvard, and working on the Civil Rights and Civil Liberties Law Review here at Harvard, been teaching for Harvard for 30 years. And I say that because it's important that people understand that those of us with these degrees didn't start there. There were people, grandparents, relatives, neighbors, friends who lifted us up to make us who we are today. And I remember, she's still alive, I remember Mrs. Bill. I don't know how my mother and father gave her this license, but she said, well, if I'm not around Junior, if you see him doing anything wrong, anywhere, you can take him and beat him right there, right? And she took that seriously. You know, I thank God for Mrs. Bill, because there were people who made a big difference. And I think all of us have those stories, and I hope those will be told at some point. The second thing, I want to really thank my former students, both Dorian's a current student now, Dorian and Brian, for the work that they've done, and also thank Ms. Austin for the remarkable job they've done putting together this conference. And you know what? It's not just something happening occasionally. This should happen annually. This is a major gathering to talk about the issues of young people growing up, and I'm glad that you have us here. And I think people like Lonnie Guinier and Susan Taylor and other people could make an incredibly valuable contribution. And so I think these kind of conversations can happen frequently. And Muhammad called me Ogle. I've been called worse things. The name is Ogletree. But I remember my favorite professor from first year law school, Milton Katz, my torts professor. And I came back from being a student in the 70s to being on the faculty in the 80s. And he was retired, and I just remember talking to him about my days as a student. And he told everybody, I'm so proud of, he called me Charlie. I don't go by Charlie, but he called me Charlie. And he called me Charlie Oglethorpe. This is about respect. And so until he died, I was Charlie Oglethorpe. And I always, yes, sir, I'm Charlie Oglethorpe. You have to respect and understand seniors sometimes they get it wrong. And even though Muhammad's only a junior in high school, this young man is going to be a leader. There's no question about that in our community. I want to talk a little bit about this because I have taught a lot of classes at Harvard, and my focus when I first started teaching 30 years ago was on criminal law, ethics, and the trial advocacy workshop, teaching people how to be lawyers in civil or criminal law, wherever they decided to pursue. And now I have a totally different set of classes, Revitalizing American Cities, which Muhammad Noor and other people, Mr. Phillips and other people came to those classes as well. And why am I teaching classes like Revitalizing American Cities? That's where it is. Our students aren't going to be working, many of them, at law firms. They're going to be working at public interest organizations, which is a good thing. They're going to be trying to save these opportunities. They're going to be working with young black men like here as mentors. And there are dozens of schools in and around Cambridge where students now are mentors as well. And the reality, what I'm saying is something that I think has been said today, but it's even more significant is this, is that if you think about how much we benefited from our parents being involved in shootings, beatings, jailings, losing their lives, being whipped, being all these types of issues in the early 1900s, in the early 20th century. If you think about Dr. King, who had a nonviolent strategy, the whole idea is that I'm going to turn the other cheek no matter what. And even I, as a young kid, said, well, you know, I'm not sure that's the right thing. I'm angry, I'm frustrated, but he was right. He was right. Don't fight. Prove that you have the right position. And I think that's what has led to where we are now. And that's why teaching now, the whole issue is not teaching about business and corporations. Those are important, taxes, those are important classes. Contracts, torts, property, all those things are very important. But the whole idea about cities is important. Because cities are changing. A lot of us can't live in the places, us that aren't here, can't live in the places that we were born, can't own houses in the places that we were born, can't own houses in the places that we had for a long time, can't go back to the public housing because it's been, in a sense, taken down and replaced by condos. And that's in every city, whether it's Boston, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Chicago, Los Angeles. You go around and you can see America has changed dramatically in terms of what it means now. And gentrification, as I talk to the students, is not an issue about race, it's about class. There are people who look like us, who are black and brown, who don't want to live with us, people who are black and brown but who are poor. And there are neighborhoods where people want to live very, in a sense, away from all of this. It's great to have two people who can talk about the history of this and talk about where we go from here. And when I said, where do we go from here? We go home. But before we go home, the whole idea is to think about what types of ideas can we have for gatherings like this? What can we see as takeaway points? What are some of the issues that are very important? And I'll start with Sean Dove, this sense about that. What do you want people to do? They've heard a lot of speeches, heard a lot of great ideas, saw some terrific PowerPoints. What should they do, and what, in your view, can be done and should be done going forward?
So much, thank you, Dr. Ogletree. I would start with a fruitful, beautiful question that you should ask yourself. And I'm a firm believer you cannot spend a day around and in and amongst this great leadership that we had an opportunity to share with without being elevated yourself. And I would say that the beautiful, fruitful question that you should ask yourself is what Dr. Ron Ferguson brought up, has to do around your North Star. And I believe that everyone has an assignment and everyone has a role and everyone has a place and position with this work. And sometimes we got to find out where we don't fit in order to find out where we do fit. But beginning to ask that questions, why was I here today? What am I going to do? And where is it aligned with my North Star?
Thank you very much. Dr. Austin, your view about what should people take away and what should they be doing when they leave here today?
Well, Professor, it's not quite as organized and concise as Sean's, but I'm really sometimes stumped with that because someone said it, I think, on the last panel. None of these issues or questions are one size fits all.
Right.
And the diversity within the African American community is huge. It is great. And we sometimes wish not to accept it. We really don't like it. And we have an honorable reason for not liking it. We don't wish in our hearts to leave anyone behind. But in doing so, we fail to ask the hard questions. And so many things go by the board because we don't want to do it. And many times we will say racism, when racism may have absolutely nothing to do with it. For me, the last part today was very good. I left some things out of my speech because it was too long. And one of those was we need to have just a workshop on fact and fiction. Just that. 2 or 3 days on fact and fiction. Because we need to get the story straight. And the story is not the same for everyone. It is very different. I mean, there are people whose families, black people, have been educated for 5 and 6 generations. Why not say that? What's wrong with that? Then there's some of us who just got there. Nothing wrong with that. The point is, we must discuss fact from fiction. The narrative has to be rebuilt, but it has to be, I think, and I think we got this from some speakers, and we did not get it from others because that is what dialogue is about. We don't all agree. Isn't that wonderful? That we don't have to all agree. We just have to talk about it, discuss it, and see where we want to go. It is, for me, that one thing. Let's have a time when we can talk about what is fact and what is fiction, and then build the narratives going forward for not only these young men, but for us. Because we can't teach our young people anything if we don't know ourselves and if we have it all wrong. So that would be my takeaway.
And let me, I'm going to respond to the questions as well, particularly for the young men here who are here from a variety of places. I think that this may sound complicated, but whatever you decide to do, you have to find your comfort zone. So what is he talking about? Find your comfort zone. What are you comfortable doing? Talking, drawing, writing, running. collaborating, acting independently. All those things are important. And I say it's important because I am blessed that you guys are here today. I really am. And what is it, what's the big idea about young people? Well, right today, you should know this, and I'm sure you're hearing it in school. We have as many dropouts in our system today as we've had ever before. And why are people dropping out? The whole idea is that we've solved that problem. But you know people every day who are dropping out, and they're dropping out, particularly black males, out of high school. They're stopping. And they have a whole series of reasons, and not because they didn't do academically well. They just said, you know what, all I'm going to do is get a job. I can go get a job now. Well, they can't get the job that my father or grandfather or your parents got, or your parents got. It's very hard for people to find those jobs now. And I'm hoping that people will stay in school. And I think we have to make school relevant. And one of the things that we're hoping to do, we're here at the Ed School at Harvard, but I think it's very important to think about how important it is to understand the whole issue of education, how critical it is to your success. We can tell you, you can't survive without it. You can't. And it doesn't matter what kind of a student you are, but the idea that you're diligent is going to make an enormous amount of difference in your ability to be successful. There are schools here in Cambridge, there are schools in Boston, there are schools all around. I just see particularly African-American boys dropping out saying, I'm just tired of school. And it just breaks my heart because I was tired of school too. I was a troublemaker too, and I had to find my comfort zone, and it was reading. And yours may be something different. It was reading books. And the one thing that was great that you don't have that I had, we had libraries all around. You can check out, 20 books. And the whole idea was important. And you'll learn things too, things that are important. I'm not saying you should say this to your parents or your grandparents. I did. And I just want to share one idea. I love reading books, and every time I would be reading books, I learned how to read in the dark, right? They turned the lights out, go to bed, and I kept reading, right? And my mother and grandmother, boy, go to bed, turn the light out. We don't want you reading books because you're going to go blind. I said, yes, Mom, yes, Nana, from my grandmother. And they left, the lights were turned out, right? And I just kept reading. And what I wanted to say is that, ladies, I know you're my mom and my grandmother, but you won't go blind from reading in the dark. I know that because I read about that, right? You won't go blind. You young men know what I'm talking about, right? And so there is a resistance, but I did it in a way that they weren't in the room. They didn't hear what I had to say, right? But it was very important to try to do that. The second thing, you have to grab the hand of somebody else in the classroom who you see is not reacting to what's being taught, is bored. And that person may have a whole series of reasons for not wanting to pay attention in the math class, the reading class, whatever the class may be. It may be that person was assaulted the night before. That person didn't eat the morning before. That person was denied the idea of coming to school with a full belly. That person was afraid that if I come to this school, I have to walk by places where people will beat me, shoot me, maybe even kill me. Those are real things that we didn't have to deal with. We had gangs, but they were very different from the gangs that you have to deal with today. And we are here for you. Every child should have a mentor. And I say that very seriously, that all of us are mentoring a lot of people. And we will mentor even more because that makes more sense. Because that's what we have to do and to make this happen. And the other thing is that I talk to my students all the time. These are students who are from the middle class, from the working class, a whole variety of students, men and women. And the whole idea is to talk to them about what they're going to do with their careers. And I have to tell you that the one thing they tell me, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I want to do public service. I want to work for the ACLU or the NAACP, or I want to go back and do all this kind of work. But then they have not 20,000, not 40,000. They have over $100,000 in debt just for going to college and going to law school. And there's no help for them. I just got a call from a parent who I know. Said, my son was just admitted to Harvard University. I am so glad. And they're asking him, asking me as his parent to pay $40,000 in tuition a year. because I make $100,000. He can't pay $40,000 to it. You say, well, wait, $40,000 is less than half. Well, it's a lot of money. And that he may have to tell his son, you can't go to Harvard, not because you didn't earn the right to be there. And his son is saying, Dad, look at me, I'm the first to go to Harvard. He says, I can't afford to pay for you. And I've been contacting the administration, everybody trying to get this, some relief for this family. It is a burden that you guys have never imagined, never seen, but it's real. And so you've got to grab somebody, keep them in school, make sure that they go on and they can get a job. The other thing is that there are people who want to work. And I was really pushing just a week ago about young people, the whole idea, you have this, the president did a wonderful job with My Brother's Keeper. And I said, Mr. President, that's a great idea. What about My Sister's Keeper? What about the young black girls who also want to work somewhere? Are you going to help them? And I was talking about that, the whole idea of women, young girls and young boys. And I just had a program last week in New York, and the guy said, what about me? I said, excuse me, what about me, about jobs? I said, oh, no worries, sir. We'll talk about jobs for your children. He says, no, about me working. He says, I'm 46 years old. I cannot find a job. Nobody will hire me. And we know there are incredible jobs around the country, kitchens, cleaning, cooking, a whole series of options. And I think that's important, that we have to make sure that we don't focus just on children, but on parents. And he says, it's embarrassed to tell my family that I can't pay for the food. I can't pay the rent. Or a single mother who came to me and said, you know, we're homeless. I said, why are you homeless? He says, because we haven't paid the rent for 4 months and we've been expelled from the house. Think about what that means and what it means for a family. A woman's working hard, trying to take care of her children, but she can't afford to pay the rent. The rent, and think about rent, not owning, but renting a house, what it means. Things have changed in an incredible way. And I hope that your teacher who's here will bring you to class to meet some of these students who have gone through what you've gone through or going through, and who have decided that they can make it on their own. That is, go on to college, go on to law school, etc. And I don't want to push the whole idea that you have these professions. The whole idea is that there are other things that you can do. And schools have to be responsive. Colleges have to be responsive. High schools have to be responsive. What are they doing for the people who want to be a chef, who want to be an artist, who wants to drive a truck, as my father did, who wants to do something other than teach or preach, not criticizing preachers. There you go. Be careful. Teach or preach or in some other way get involved in medical. So you can do things, and you can take one step at a time. Now, I'm speaking against this school here at the Ed School and at the law school. But I don't see why anyone would, in the 21st century, send their child to a university, a private university, and pay $40,000 a year when they can go to community college and pay $4,000 and still transfer them. Yep.
Is it the case that if your parents make $60,000 or less, it's a free ride to Harvard?
That's a myth.
I said this factor.
That's a myth,
That's part of the
right?
workshop.
That's why the workshop.
And you're quoting probably some information when the president first came and said, you know, we will pay for anybody under $60,000. This guy, you know, was making very little money, and the reality is that there's a whole lot of strings attached to that. Right now, and when it says you can go free, you can't go free. And there are a lot of students who are paying and who are suffering and who are finding that they can't go on to graduate school because their parents have to pay the debt. And they want your parents to show exactly how much they're making. And I thought my kids could go to school free, right? Yes, I'm a professor. I assume the tuition's free. It's less. I say, how much less? Well, 5%. 5%? I have to pay 95% for them to go to a place like this? I was convinced, there's some great state schools that you should go to, my dears, and it didn't work with my daughter or my son, right? But I think the cost is something that you have to talk about. How can you afford it? I love these students now in Florida, the students who are protesting, who are taking over the university. who took over the governor's office because they're concerned about what's happening in America. You know, we'd rather go to jail. When's the last time? I'm not urging anybody to get arrested, but right? That's Ogletree said we should get arrested. That's why we have a protest. I'm not saying that, but just think about how many parents were arrested, were involved in movements, and they didn't have food, they didn't have homes, they didn't have jobs like this, and they were pushing it. And I remember seeing the signs that I wish that we could all cover. You remember Dr. King had a wonderful march, and all these men were truck drivers who were marching with a sign that had 4 words on it: I am a man. And it just said an enormous amount about who they were and what they were doing. And that's what it's all about. I am a man. I am a woman. I am a person. And that should be something that should be respected and understood by those who are in power and who have the right to make these things happen. And finally, let me just say this, and particularly for the young men. We heard it today, we're not jealous or angry because people are thinking about entertainment and sports as their way out. It's a way up for a moment, but is it permanent? And you've got to figure out a way, what am I going to do tomorrow? And tomorrow is way after today ends, and what you're going to do to make things happen and make a big difference for you. And you've got to figure that out and realize that there are a lot of tremendous athletes who are absolutely poor, who are absolutely homeless, who've lost millions, not millions of dollars. I'm not going to say the names of people like Charles Barkley. I'm not going to mention his name, or the great center for the Los Angeles Lakers, Kareem. You just look and see how many people have hit the roof in terms of thinking that this is an answer. And how many, and a lot of those people, I'm not talking about these individuals, but a lot of people who drop out of college after a year because they get a scholarship, they get a lot of money, they get a contract in baseball or basketball or football, and then they get an injury, and there's nobody that can help them. So it's not envy, it's just what way can you make the best of your life, and when can you make the most out of these things. And so that's one of the things, trying to figure out how to think about jobs, think about family, think about futures, and I think that's going to be a big challenge. I'm going to come back to you guys now. We're going to end just a minute. One of the things that we've talked about and sort of didn't talk about it in a lot of depth, because we're talking about the whole idea of employment and things like that. I'm thinking about public safety. It's a big issue, and it's a big issue particularly in our community. We have both the victims and the accused. And one of the things that I want to say about public safety is this, that I had a disagreement with President Obama just a week ago when I was at the White House. He was talking about issues of criminal justice and what's right. And I had an argument with our Attorney General from California, Kamala Harris. I love her to death. She's a terrific person, doesn't believe in the death penalty. She's done a great job, and I think she should be president if she decides to run. She may not. But she and President Obama both thought that anybody who commits a violent crime, they have to go to jail. And said, wait a minute. One thing that we know, and that should be known about public safety, is that you have to examine, why did Jerome, Jamal, Jamila, why did they commit that violent crime? You need to understand that, because a lot of times it's because they have a history of physical, of mental suppression and overwhelming mental problems that cause this. And we need to look at those things. We don't think that, we can't just think that somebody committed a bad crime because they're a bad person. It's more than that, and that's what I hope this generation will do. Well, let's look at this person and examine this person. Why did this happen? And one of the courses I teach is on The Wire. I don't know how many people watch The Wire, some episodes of The Wire, and it's very interesting. You remember there's the fourth season is about young people, and it's about schools. It's about Baltimore theoretically, but it's about any school. And you see this, all of a sudden you see one black girl jumps over and cuts another black girl, right? Now, I know there's some parents who say, he was telling you about that, right? And what's amazing, and you see a teacher come in and interrupt it and knocks the black girl with the knife against the wall and takes her outside, and she's going on. And so the students are talking about, my God, she cut that girl. And my question is that, of course she cut her, but don't we want to know why? Don't we want to know what was said about her weight, her looks? She wasn't socially acceptable. The things that make people explode and implode are what we need to examine. And those are things that happen in playgrounds all the way. And I remember my wife and I were going somewhere, and everybody in the high school, everybody was running. I said, oh, it must be a sports event. It was two girls fighting. And everybody said, I got to see this, these two girls fighting. It was like a show, right? And no one thought about breaking it up. It was like, let me see it. We have to figure out a way that violence is not a part of who we are, and what we mean, what we believe in. It's very important that we challenge that. And I say that at the same time to think about going out here, public safety, and how many times young black boys in particular have been stopped. I've been stopped over and over again. I can't get a cab in New York. I cannot get a taxi cab. I wear my three-piece suit. I hold up my, Colin Powell book. I do everything trying to, say, hey, this is who I am, right? Give me a break, right? They will go by. You know who gets cabs for me in New York? White men and white women. They see me there waiting and they'll roll a cab down, open up the back door, and then say, come on, get in. And then the driver looks back. And most of the cab drivers in New York or here are people who are new immigrants to the country. What are the first thing they learn? Black people are going to kill you, rob you, rape you, take you away from your taxi cab. They learn that before we even teach it. And it tells you that immigrants come to the United States with a sense about race and ethnicity and what it means. And when you are going to, you think you have a hard time, class doesn't matter. Class doesn't matter when it comes to things like that, when you think about it. And I have to say, before I end, I had the displeasure, it was a pleasure, but I had the unfortunate circumstance of representing not just Mojo, which I did, indigent defendants in many, many years, but in 2009, representing Professor Henry Louis Gates Jr. When he was in his own house, and he was placed under arrest. And for him, it was like, why is this happening to me? And my point is this is it. You never escape race. You think, but I am, do you know who I am? That's what he said. Do you know who I am? Do you know who you're messing with? And the police officers, a working class police officer from Cambridge, went to the same high school that my kids went to, and he's saying to himself, yeah, I know who you are. You were a black guy who won't come out of your house, and I'm going to have to lock you up, right? And there were no charges were dismissed, but it had something to do, because I knew the district attorney, I knew the judge, I knew the police officer, I knew all those folks, which made a difference in Skip Gates' life. But he still is reeling. How could they put handcuffs on me? And the point is, because you're black, or brown, or a woman, or young, or old, or wearing a certain amount, it's amazing what happens. And that's what I talk about public safety. It's very complicated when you find those things that happen. And when I said it happened to me, it happened to me going to my hometown. One of the things that you get when you get as old as I am is that this was 15 years ago, I was going because they opened up a brand new University of California in Merced. And I flew into Fresno, which is about 50 miles from Merced. And they upgraded me. They wouldn't give me a regular car that I had asked for. They gave me Escalade Cadillac, white. And I'm driving to my old neighborhood to see my old house, see what it looks like. And a police officer came up right behind me, put the lights on. I said, damn, what am I? I'm not speeding. I'm going 15 miles an hour in a 20-mile-an-hour zone. And he says, sir, license and registration. I gave him that. He says, where are you going? I said, to my old home, 1240 home address. She said, well, you know, that's a drug-infested area. I said, well, I want to see where I lived when I was a kid, just a few blocks away. Is that okay? Yeah. And he just said, well, you know, where'd you get the car? I said, I rented the car. Here's the papers. Here's the contract. He says, okay, so what are you here for? I said, well, I'm here. I'm going to be speaking tomorrow. Well, what are you going to be speaking about? I'm going to Merced, University of Merced. There's a new college at Merced. What are you going to talk about? I'm going to talk about racial profiling. And he looked at me like, you can go, right? But you know, my speech the next day was about officer friendly.
Right.
And told the whole story. So all of Merced knew, right? If you dress a certain way, you drive a certain way, you go to a certain area, you're going to be treated differently because of your race, of your ethnicity, or your gender. All those things matter. And I say that to tell you that you can't escape it just because, you know, you can live in a different neighborhood. It won't matter. And I remember before these young people were born, a lot of people know Miles, the great jazz man. And Miles made it very clear with the police. He would tell them, he says, today I'm driving my yellow Lexus. Tomorrow I'm driving my green Lexus. And the day after I'm driving my red one. So I want you guys to know those new cars, those are my cars, right? Just in case you want to stop me, that's me. I own every single one of the cars. And I think his point was, Miles Davis was making a point, that judge me by what I do and don't judge me by what I drive. And the same thing happened to Johnny Cochran in Los Angeles. I wrote about this in the book. Johnny Cochran, my good friend, was in Los Angeles. John had a big car, and he had his kids in the back, and the police pulled him over because they were saying driver's license. Said, "Oh, Mr. Cochran, it's you. We didn't know it was you." He says, "Well, it is me. And why did you pull me over?" He says, "Well, driving this car, you know, we're wondering. Well, was I speeding? No. Did I cross the yellow line? No. But why did you stop me?" Well, Mr. Cochran is driving the car. And it tells you that no matter where you are or what you do, you can't overcome the challenges of race. It's real. And I really want to thank you, Dorian and Brian and Ms. Austin, for the work in making this a very successful event. And if you guys want to have a closing.
If I could, Professor,
yep.
I want to, this doesn't happen to me again, I'm going to make Sean stand up, if you don't mind. Rarely do you get the opportunity to pass the baton to someone else to pick up this work. I was so pleased when Sean and Rashid said that they were going to do this. And I must say, I questioned some of it, but I was extremely pleased. I didn't know whether they would or not. But when they came out with the report from the Council on Foundations, it was obvious they were going big time,
yep.
And they were not playing. And I am so appreciative because you got to see today all the fantastic work that people have been doing for years, some of them without grant money. They are just doing the work. Thank you for picking it up. I look forward to working with you and with Rashid and all the rest of the young people who are now in the foundation world who can make things happen. Now, don't go there and be that foundation person that says no to everybody who comes, never gives them a nickel. You know, there was something in my day, that's how you made your bona fide.
Right.
You could go and say, oh, no, I didn't fund those nitwits. they didn't get the money. Don't do that. So, I mean, I know you're not going to do that. You have the ability to do more. But thank you for taking this up and moving with it.
Thank you for the sowing the seeds for all of us today. God bless you, brother.
And my last thing, Professor, my wife told me that our son tweeted her and said, please tell Daddy, and after I told that awful story about him, let the people know that I am doing fine. He's doing fine. He's a dentist in Syracuse. I don't know about Syracuse, but he's a dentist in Syracuse. He has a beautiful little girl and a wife, and he's doing okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for giving of your time today, too.
Oh, my pleasure.
And I know you guys don't.
We have, to close this out, a person who's made an incredible difference here at Harvard University. She's been very active in the issue of diversity and made it possible for events like this for us to, in a sense, appreciate the fact that people are different than, and that they have to be treated differently. And she has been a leader who has influenced the president of Harvard University, Drew Faust, and trying to think about what that means and how important it is. Because, you know, the reality is that diversity can change from generation to generation. And I heard people talking about diversity, said, diversity, oh, we have to have some of this and some of that and some of that. And I said, what about us? What about some black folks? Oh, we had them already. We tried them already. That was last century. Yeah, we have, and so the idea is that diversity still should include us because our numbers are still a challenge. And the university is comfortable at 10%. I'd love to see it at 20%, 30%. I'd love to see it grow. And I'm not, you know, trying to push Harvard over Howard or over Morehouse or any other university, but I think the reality is that I'm really glad, and I want to applaud the students here who are having the same thing we had 30 years ago in college about diversity. They're making the issue here at Harvard, and I think that's very important. And the person who is leading that charge, no, she's not, but the person who has to address those issues and talk to the president a lot about diversity is the one who's going to speak to us now. Please welcome, if you will, Lisa Coleman.
Well, hello, everyone. So my responsibilities are twofold. One, I have a rather large responsibility, and then I'm going to close out the conference. So I would like to just walk over and say, hello. 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 For your contributions, I'm just honored to be here on the stage with you, and thank you for all that you've done, not just in repairing the breach, but your contributions to our community across time. And in recognition of your contributions, we would like to award you this award, which says, Bobby William Austin, PhD, in acknowledgement of your vision, dedication, leadership, and inspiration, we present you with this Distinguished Service Award from Harvard University, Repairing the Breach, 2014. So as Charles Ogletree mentioned, I'm the Chief Diversity Officer and Special Assistant to the President here, and I've been here for about 4 years. And like I said, my role right now is to close out the conference, and I'm going to try to be brief. But as a classically trained academic, that is a challenge. So, but I checked with my corporate partners, so they told me this is brief. So let me begin with the thank yous. On behalf of the university, the president, et cetera, thank you to everyone. Thank you for the learning, the engagement, and of course, thank you to Dorian, Brian, and Ariana, men and women of our future. Dorian and I met a few short months ago, and then over a luncheon one day, he said, I have an idea. He came back with partners and a program, and then he showed me this program about 6 months later, and so that's what we have here today. And the story goes, I hear, that he told Bobby Austin that he would be speaking to about 50 people at a lecture somewhere, and this is the result of that lecture. So to you and to everyone, again, thank you. The magnificent student and members of the Harvard Graduate School, to the dean, thank you to our Tuskegee photographer, Carl Miller, and of course to the Casey Foundation and to all of our partners and panelists for their many contributions. Last week, I had the pleasure of providing a keynote for a Boston area consortium, and one of the areas that I covered was precociousness and children. I began with the story of my own childhood, and I was glad to hear Charles Ogletree was probably just as precocious as I, as a child. Suffice it to say, I will not bore you with my childhood, but I had the hand of God on the back of my neck. It was the hand of my mother and father, constantly reaching for me. And there was this word that was used to describe me consistently throughout my childhood, and I would hear it again and again until I reached graduate school, and that word was called potential. you have potential. Now, I understood as a child that meant I had the potential to be a number of things: criminal, welfare mother, a number of things. Potential had that kind of leaning toward. So my point actually, though, is how do we harness and innovate potential? How do we harness and innovate precociousness? Like my ancestors and family members before me, I have been the first in numerous roles in my life. I think back to so many jobs that did not exist 20 years ago, like iPhones or iPads available, let alone Androids, which were something only imagined on TV. So for me, when I think of excellence in higher education, I raise the question, how do we create what we do not know? Not just individual potential, but our collective potential. As Miriam Wright Edelman reminded me just 2 weeks ago at a presentation at the Kennedy School about when she was presenting about reimagining our schools, our future, our connection, she suggested, we have to be pioneers. She said, it was not raining when Noah started to build the ark. Not the Russell Crowe Noah, the other Noah. So, as we think of our many challenges and opportunities today, the poverty levels, residential segregation, banking practices, incarceration, I am reminded of what James Baldwin in Another Country, where he writes that we as a nation are still developing, enduring, and have a way to go. But we can, quote, become our better selves, and, quote, and whatever one's journey, one's got to accept the fact that collisions will occur, end quote. In fact, they are necessary. So whether they are rear enders, fender benders, or even pileups occur, we must meet them with engaged enthusiasm. We must engage, as Dr. Wilson told us today, the outrage. That outrage that is directed toward a purpose-driven education. Furthermore, as Ron Ferguson reminded us, work that focuses on early childhood education is crucial. And as many panelists also remarked, we need to make groundbreaking connections between local and small businesses, partners across local and federal and state communities. We need to think about constructing our neighborhoods and communities and reconfiguring the conversations about Black men and women, that we are assets and not the problem. We must reconstitute our family, as Charles said. We heard about all types of educational models, assessments, entrepreneurial activities, mentorship, sponsorship, and many more. All of this will allow us to reimagine and have the tools, the data, and the truth to affect change. Now, in many ways, of course, I'm speaking to the converted today because that's why we all are here. Now, in diversity work, that's the work that I do, we think of learning on a spectrum, right? So there's low-level capacity, sort of low-level cultural competency, and high-level competency. I call it sort of idiocy to full capacity. And if we think about what Dr. Bobby William Austin said today in underscoring cultural diversity and why it's so important, let me remind you of two examples. One has to do with drugs. And we can remember back to the 19th and 20s and 30s when heroin was plaguing the African American community, and no one lifted a finger until the 1940s and 50s when it began to plague majority and white communities. And then it was a national problem. So this brings me to this question of the boy crisis in American higher education. And for those of us who study gender, as I have studied over the years, there are many of us who raised questions years ago when there was the African American boy crisis that perhaps we should start studying it then and gain some traction and learn from our mistakes until there was the national boy crisis that now, of course, has raised this agenda. So to go back to these earlier points, if we start to think and look at the sites of oppression, perhaps we could gain true traction and make mistakes that would lead us to a future. My life has been one of outrage. I am outraged. I remain optimistically outraged because I, like Baldwin, know that history is the present. We carry our history with us. We are the history. And it is here where history becomes, quote, a garment we can wear and share, not a cloak that we will hide in. We must not forget that the country is only as good and as strong as the people who make it up, and the country turns into what people want it to become. Now, this country is going to be transformed. It will not be transformed by an act of God, but by all of us, end quote. So I agree with Jimmy that the role of the Negro in American life has something to do with our concept of God. And this, for me, is the most oppressed among us have something to do with God. Baldwin goes on to say that from his point of view, the concept of God is not big enough. It has to be made much bigger than it is, because after all, God's not anybody's toy. To be with God is to be really involved with some enormous, overwhelming desire which controls power, which you cannot control and controls you. I conceive of my life as something I do not quite understand, but I am moving towards something, the God within me, that makes me move onward to a better tomorrow. So, to the young futurists, to those under 33, I won't make you stand again, and I certainly won't make those stand who are over 33. It is true. It is not just, a young man was talking about truth. It is not just our crisis. It is a national crisis. Thank you to the young man who mentioned Marlon Riggs. I had the opportunity to work with Marlon early in my life. And if it were not for him and so many others, I would not be here, and so many of us would not be here. Potential would have not led the journey toward Harvard. Lastly, I'd like to say, I had the occasion to spend some time with Mae Jemison last week. Mae Jemison is an astronaut, as some of you may know. And Mae has this plan to get us to another planet. Now, Mae was a precocious child. As she described, she looked up into the sky knowing that someday she would go there, even though the only person she could have ever seen go there was Uhura from Star Trek. Yes. And so the reality is, though, Uhura would become her reality. She would go into space. She would become one of our first astronauts, and certainly our first African-American female astronaut. So as Mae continued her lecture, I believed. I became a believer. I knew I, too, would go to Pluto. I would go to Mars. I might even go to Saturn. Interstellar travel, we have only just begun to imagine. So for me, it is here that I recognize, as Lilia Watson, the Indigenous Australian author, writes, if you have come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come here because your liberation is bound with mine, let us work together. As we live and learn and work together, let us remember, as Jimmy Baldwin rightly declares, the world is before you, and you need not take it or leave it as it was when you came in. Thank you very much. Thank you for your contributions. Please join us. I know I talk very fast. I was raised in New York. Please join us at the Gutman Conference Center for the pop-up sessions. We will be there for another hour. Thank you again.